blimey.
Right? Yeah,
Yeah,
right.
okay.
No, I used to live in Kenya when I was about 6 years old.
Okay.
And we were in this wildlife park in a grey Morris Minor. This rhino started chasing us. There's me and my sister in the back seat.
Right.
It was like something out of Jurassic Park.
Yeah.
We were turning around saying, "Believe it, Dad. Just put your foot down, Dad. We're in a field. Put your foot down." This rhino was chasing us.
One from Mark here in Derby. Went on holiday for our first romantic holiday to Tunisia years ago. Decided to take my girl into a petting zoo. I got a bag of food to feed the animals. A giant goat then went for me, putting its front legs over my shoulders and proceeding to headbutt me over a fence into one of the pens, covering me in the food and making my nose bleed. I got out of the pen, then the goat and all his mates attacked me again, sending me running and screaming like a girl out of the zoo, with my girlfriend rolling with laughter on the floor.
A tarantula climbed up the bottom of the bed on the sheet.
Yeah.
And it walked all the way up. It's eyeball to eyeball.
Wow.
And I thought to myself, what am I going to do when it climbs over my face? But then a miracle happened. It raised its two front legs and waved them around. And then it turned around and walked down the side of the sheet.
Boris Johnson been attacked by an ostrich. The former PM was enjoying a safari trip with his family when the bird leaned into his car and went oi oi and pecked his hand. In footage shared online, he quickly jerked from the ostrich. Don't dirty minds away from the ostrich, and shouted, "Oh, cripes, get hell," before driving off. And so I just set it out there. Have you been attacked by an animal? When I was about 7, says Trevor Jenkins, on holiday in Spain in the 70s, a monkey pulled my long hair. It was long because it was the 70s. I was in floods of tears. And as the family car drove out the car park, an elephant ripped off the car mirror. We got the message. Spanish animals aren't to be trusted. Jeremy, Brittany here from the United States. I was spurred by a rooster in my right foot a few years ago. Spurred? How do you get spurred by a rooster?
And one here from Dan in Hampshire. Morning, Mike. As an Aussie that has been dive-bombed by our version of the magpie, which is much bigger, every springtime, the folk in...
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello and good morning on this Good Friday, and especially big hello to all of my practicing Christian listeners, because I understand how important this weekend is for us. And you know, I think it would be remiss if I didn't address that, because I find too often when I watch media, this is of course the biggest, most important festival in Christianity. We are still nominally a Christian nation, and yet I've not really seen a peak of conversation about Easter and the meaning of Easter anywhere. Of course, if it is any other religious festival, particularly, let's say, one that begins with the letter R, we would hear nothing but. So I do want to take the opportunity, as I myself am a practicing Christian, to reflect on Good Friday and what that actually means. So bear with me while I do this. And later on, by the way, we're going to be joined by Peter Hitchens, who's going to do much the same, because it was reading something he had written in the Mail today that really struck a chord with me as I was sitting on the tube coming to work. Rather wishing I wasn't, because I'd rather be observing the holy day, but, you know, God loves a bit of hard work. And one thing Peter wrote, and I think that this is something very important to bear in mind about what this whole weekend means. There is the dark before the light, of course, and we look forward to celebrating the resurrection of Christ. But today, on Good Friday, and Peter Hitchens writes, there is no fun here. Just the dirty betrayal of a good man by those he thought were his friends. A screeching mob full of planted influencers egging it on. A cowardly politician giving in to them. A show trial with false witnesses, and a wrongful execution of extreme cruelty. Now, I'm sure reading those words, certain things that have happened in recent years may have sprung into your mind. The habits of society to will on collective vengeance against people who dare challenge the newly established order. And one thing that Jesus did, and of course there are those who believed he was the second coming, the Son of God. There were others who believed he was a danger to society. There were those that just thought he was a sorcerer. But one thing he did was he challenged wrongly held convictions within society, dangerous convictions. He challenged people over whether women should cover their heads, for example. He didn't challenge the government directly. He said, render unto Caesar what is Caesar's. The taxman will do as the taxman will do. But when he saw groupthink, dangerous groupthink, when he saw extravagance, indulgence of a very perilous kind, he gave people important life lessons. Whether you believe in God and whether you believe in the resurrection of Jesus Christ, our society has been built on fundamental Christian teachings, on 10 very important commandments that guide not just us, in fact, but the whole world on how we should live. And when you reflect on the violence and the brutality of the ancient world, the murderous games, the sexual permissiveness, and then you see the revolution that came with Jesus Christ and the teachings of Christianity. Thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not covet, monogamy. They are the things now that underpin the very fabric of our society. So whether you're a Christian or not this weekend, please do take the time to reflect on what Christianity has done, not just for this country, but for the West, civilizationally, for the past 2,000 years. All right, OK, that's my Easter stuff done with. If you want to share your thoughts on anything we're talking about on today's show, the number to call is 0344 499 1000. You can use that number as well to send me a WhatsApp message or leave me a voice note. I adored Chantel's voice note that Mike played me out. It was brilliant during our little handover there. So if you think you've got some comedic wit about you today, then do indulge me, please. 87222 is the number. If you would like to send a text message, of course, you must write the word talk before your text. That way, it finds its way through the pinball of space, straight into the masts on top of Talk Towers and here into the studio onto these computers in front of me. We're on X at talkTV. Right. Let's get on with some news, shall we? Because I'm joined now by James Price, former Conservative government advisor. James, always wonderful to have you on the show, and especially on a Good Friday. First of all, your thoughts on Good Friday. I'm going to try and make sure I do this throughout the show. It hasn't necessarily been endorsed by my producers, but if I can't make this a semi-Christian show today, who can? So your thoughts, first of all, on the importance of Easter, briefly.
Yeah, absolutely. I thought that was a wonderful start to the show, Alex, and I echo all the sentiments completely. You know, in the stories that we're about to talk about in this fallen world, it's all going to be pretty grim. And every time you and I end up talking on air, all the stories end up being pretty grim. And you start to lose faith in humanity when you hear endless horrible stories about corrupt, mostly socialist politicians, and you hear about the rape gangs, all just the horribleness of everything that's going on. And so to stop for a moment and think about some event that happened, better identified by historical sources than most other events actually in human history, a hell of a lot more evidence for the resurrection and for the life of Jesus in general than the life of Alexander the Great, the life of almost anybody, frankly, up until very, very recently in the advent of the printing press. So, you know, to think about those very well attested events that somebody was willing to sacrifice themselves, and this idea that they might even come back and having defeated death, you know, the metaphysics of it are a wonderful and profound thing. And if you want to go and you're curious about it, pop into a church if you've not been before or for a long time. Sunday will be the best day for it because, you know, you might look sad today with Jesus being crucified, but I've got a feeling there's a comeback on the cards and people should go and see.
That very body begins to breathe. Oh, but it brings a tear to my eye.
Even if they don't want to get in on the metaphysics of it just now, because I understand that in a world where you've been told that only idiots believe in God, it might be a bit of a stretch.
Right.
If they've got some spare time over this weekend, and we've got a few bank holidays, go and read something like Tom Holland's Dominion and see exactly, as you say, Alex, the profound impact that these really radical ideas have had on them. The fact that, as you say, colosseums where slaves were killed for sport and entertainment are replaced over time with old people's homes. And you hear stories about how the first Christians would go and collect babies who had been left on rubbish heaps, and they would take them into their homes and look after them, because this idea that all human life had worth was completely alien to Romans and Greeks. Persians and other people.
I mean, one thing that wasn't alien to the Romans and Greeks were all sorts of, sort of peculiar sexual fetishes that they indulged in to a pretty violent and diabolical degree. I mean, in a Roman home, the Roman man was in charge of all the humans within that home and all of their orifices, and I say no more. Which brings me on to the weirdest segue I've ever done, perhaps. It brings me on to this massive and important victory in the Supreme Court that, guess what? A woman is a woman, and women need to be treated with dignity and respect. And that means when women are potentially going to be in a state of undress or vulnerable or somewhere where they need to have a sense of integrity and privacy, that a girt man should not be able to just wander in there and profess to be a woman and basically indulge in whatever fetish might float his boat that day. Of course, that's not to say that people with genuine gender dysphoria treat dressing up as a woman as a fetish, but there's certainly a cohort of men who have decided that being a woman might enable them to excel within certain sports that perhaps they were just mediocre at, or have a nicer time in prison if they were an abuser or a rapist of women. And indeed, of course, men who still want to strangely have a beard while putting on a dress and go into women's toilets, which I'm pretty sure is for the kicks. It should be very simple. It shouldn't have needed to go to court, for crying out loud. Like I was saying earlier, that to me is a massive red flag against our society. And yet, despite this very important victory, the Labour Party is still torn about whether they can get behind it.
Yeah, quite. I mean, the whole thing has been a disgraceful and embarrassing and shameful abnegation of responsibility by the entirety of the political class. A few people, and I don't often give Kemi Badenoch all the credit in the world. Kemi was very good on this issue all the way from the start and very brave on talking about it, but not many other politicians were. They were scared of being called transphobic. They were scared of being, frankly, attacked in the street. They were scared of their children being harassed and barracked by teachers for holding the view that everybody in history has ever held up until 5 minutes ago. And so I can understand that the kind of scary pressure, and some of the women that people watching on the screen now who were celebrating this outside the Supreme Court yesterday had very real threats against their lives made. Yeah. They're saying things like they've got to watch out because some of these people now know where they live and there will be violent reprisals. So I understand the stakes for speaking out about some of this stuff. And as you say, it's wonderful that it's now happened. And you will be better qualified, Alex, than me, because you're one of the few people who has been speaking out about this as bravely as you have for years and years about it, about how good this is going to be for women up and down the land. But let's, on Good Friday of all days, even try and have, I think we should have compassion for people who have been told, who are men who have been told that they're women and vice versa. And these are people who are obviously suffering, as you say, from a kind of mental dysmorphia about these things. And whilst in previous generations, this might have been something like anorexia or bulimia, what never happened with girls who were suffering from anorexia was that celebrities, politicians, journalists, lawyers, pillars of society, all the rest were going up and saying, yeah, you know what, you are actually really fat and you should starve yourself. Nobody was doing that. Whereas people who are doing these acts to themselves and cutting bits of body parts off and taking irreversible drugs that will prevent them from having their own children in the future were being encouraged into doing this.
The wickedness of it all, and the madness of crowds. Again, it reflects what happens over Easter when the baying mob is given the choice between this awful murderous man or this person who's been doing so much good in society. Who are we going to nail to a cross? And the crowds all go along with nail the good man to the cross. Like I said, Easter really does make you think. Let's talk about teachers, the people who should be safeguarding morality, perhaps. They're going to potentially strike this autumn to make Labour MPs pay unless they get more cash. That's according to the National Education Union. The General Secretary, Daniel Kebede, we know he's a bit of a leftist firebrand, accused ministers of betraying teachers with a 2.8% pay recommendation. I mean, this is always going to be the difficulty of Labour. When they came in and gave generous public sector pay increases to certain people and left others behind, they were going to face the wrath of those who hadn't been equally rewarded.
Yeah, absolutely right. I mean, firstly, on this Kabedi character, you say known as a bit of a leftist. This is someone who's had to apologise for making various anti-Semitic remarks and has turned up at rallies where people have shouted, you know, basically death to the Jews and things of that nature. Is a very, very dodgy character indeed. Has said that Britain is completely and fundamentally racist and evil, and has said that the whole education system is racist and evil. And I think when people throw around these kind of words willy-nilly like that, we should, in any self-respecting society, just say, okay, off you go and draw on the walls with crayons and ignore him. And instead, he's in charge of a powerful teaching union. On the unions themselves, this is what trade unions do, right? They agitate and they cause problems and trouble for the benefit of their members. But the second part is to the detriment of everybody else, whether that's people striking on the trains or the tubes, whether it's teachers, whether it's junior doctors. They'll do it for their own benefit at the detriment of other people. And in this case, some of the most vulnerable people in our society, aka young children, to whom these people ought to have a responsibility to teach and help them. And instead, they're pushing far left ideologies to poison their brains. And it's being encouraged by the Labour Education Secretary, Bridget Phillips.
Oh, she's a monster.
Remember her name. Because although Ed Miliband and Rachel Reeves get all of the plaudits at the moment, or the opposite, I think Phillipson is the most dangerous and damaging person in this government.
She has a radical ideology, that's for sure. But didn't the teachers' union, one of them, I don't know if it's the same one, recently ruled that Reform UK should be taught in classrooms as dangerous and racist? I mean, it's just, it beggars belief that any you. Right, now, households will be facing an extra 100 quid on bills if Britain hands over a blank cheque to the EU by joining their net zero scheme. That is a warning that is coming from the Conservative Party, because there are fears that the Prime Minister will use a summit next month to align UK and EU emission trading schemes as part of a reset. Now, at the same time, of course, we've got this discussion about whether we can get a brilliant trade deal with America. They're poised, they're waiting. They said it won't come at any, without conditions, and we want the UK to move fast on this. One assumes if the UK decides to go down the balmy, bonkers net zero agenda of the EU, America might say, pack your bags, we're not interested.
Yeah, absolutely right. The smart move would be to try and muddle on through as best we can between the forces of the United States and the European Union. And we could do different deals with them if we wanted to, without giving away things that would be too detrimental. This is a very fundamental concept in deal making. Who knows how to make deals? Well, probably the bloke who wrote the book on it, or let's say Ghost wrote the book on it, who now is the occupant of the White House. He understands the give and take, that you need to offer certain things, you need to start from certain fairly punchy positions in order to negotiate back to something that's more equitable. And this kind of back and forth is basically the fundamental concept of all capitalism, by the way, right? The consenting exchange of goods and services and deal making. The point is not to just give everything away straight away on a silver platter, which I'm afraid is what Starmer is doing to the European Union. This is a group that hasn't grown for God knows how many years now. It's now, way many times poorer than the United States of America. And the net zero stuff is a big part of that and will be an increasing part of that. So why we're choosing to do this now, I think viewers and listeners could only probably conclude that these are soft soak attempts by the Labour Party to inch us back inside the European Union and under the Brussels yoke, which is not something
and Trump knows what he's doing. He knows what he's doing with these tariffs. He hates the EU. He wants Europe to be a collection of competing nations who challenge each other for greatness, who rid themselves of regulation, who protect civilization. I mean, interestingly, watching that meeting between Meloni and Trump, where she talks about making the West great again and how she sees herself perhaps as the defender of an entire civilization, and that is very positive to hear. And she's basically gone against the EU by doing that. We've actually got a little clip of that, I'm pleased to say, so hopefully we'll be able to roll that in just a moment's time. Yep, we can. Here we go.
When I speak about West, mainly I don't speak about a geographical space. I speak about a civilization. And I want to make that civilization stronger. So I think even if we have some problems, between the two shores of the Atlantic, it is the time that we try to sit down and find solutions. So I want to thank President Trump for having accepted an invitation to pay an official visit to Rome in the near future, and consider the possibility in that occasion to meet also with Europe. The goal for me is to make the West great again. Okay? And I think we can do it together.
We can.
What a wonderful woman. I adore her to the bone. Right, now let's talk about something that's rather alarming, unfortunately not surprising. In the midst of the Birmingham bin strike, activists are now plotting, talk about using chaos to create even more chaos, on forming a new pro-Palestine party to break away from Labour. Campaigners for Unite, which is the union behind the bin crisis, have now urged colleagues to consider joining forces with lefty Greens, other trade unionists and Free Palestine activists in a new coalition. What is it about the relationship between the hard left and Islam, James?
Well, we've gone from just a wonderful little video there where I was going to say, as the kids say, injected into my veins about how great it is, the idea that we should make the West great again and that this is a kind of civilizational entity. It's not the European Union, it's countries in Europe, it's the United States of America, it's the rest of the Anglosphere of Canada and New Zealand and Australia. It's the pinnacle of human civilization we've achieved thus far by believing in ourselves, by believing in our history, in our arts, in our culture, in the buildings that we create that then sculpt us, in our traditions, in literature, in opera, all these wonderful things. And all of these things are opposed by both the hard left and radical Islam. That is one of the links they have. They also, by the way, all seem to hate Jews, which is another marker of being anti-civilization, I would say. But it is this weird coalition of people who, on almost any other issue, would probably violently disagree. I'm not sure that radical Islam believes there are that many more than two genders. I'm not sure in some cases radical Islam believes more than one, actually, the way that they treat women in those societies and force them to cover their heads and faces all day long, and the despicable things they do to some of their family members and honor killings and things like that. So there are some links there and some very weird differences. But one thing is for sure, they are the enemies of civilization. And if you're starting to get them organizing into political parties around either ethnic or religious or sectarian lines, know one thing: these people are your enemies. They hate you. They hate everybody who is watching this or listening to this or reading a transcript of this. They hate your freedoms. They hate your family. They hate everything that you hold dear, and they will stop at nothing to destroy it. And so we need to be ready for that fight.
United by hate and often dragging along the baying mob. I reference again what's happened today in history. James Price, former Conservative government advisor, thank you very much. I'm going to go to the break shortly, but before I do, let's read a few of your messages, because after the break I'm going to be speaking to some of you on the phone, one hopes. A happy Easter, Alex, going to Mass on Easter Sunday, which is our most important day of the year. And then we're going to enjoy our family dinner. Indeed, it is the most important day of the year. And as someone else was messaged saying, I've decided I'm going back to church this Sunday. I've always been a Christian, but I stopped going to church proper since the age of 15. Don't know how old you are now. Obviously been to weddings and funerals, but I feel the need now to go. Let's fill up our churches again. We don't want them disappearing. It's funny, there's this real resurgence of Christianity, especially among younger generations, when they've realised what's at stake and perhaps what we have been sacrificing for too long. And Lorraine has messaged about the National Education Union and Reform UK. The NEU and their self-proclaimed Marxist leader are an absolute disgrace. They're actively indoctrinating children with their own political ideology of lies and hate in order to deliberately pervert our political democracy. They should be immediately banned, and if I was a teacher, I would be resigning from such a dangerous organisation. As a parent, if I find my child with any NEU indoctrinating publicity or any teacher telling them that reform is racist, I will be registering it as a hate crime, and I will expect the police to act. We cannot have such dangerous people involved in education. Powerful stuff. Now, if you want to add your voice to the conversation, the number to call is 03444991000. That's charged at your normal network rate. You can use that number as well to send me a WhatsApp message or leave me a voice note. You know I love a good voice note. 87222 is the number to text. Remember to write the word talk before your message, and we're on X at talkTV. Your calls coming up after this short break.
It's in their blood, in their political ideology to agree with the unions.
Not only that, Angela Rayner's workers' rights bill is going to give unions even more power. It's going to make it easier for unions to strike. It's going to make it easier for unions to have us over a barrel. And this thing in Birmingham, there's a little taste of what could yet be to come. And I think Angela Rayner's got herself into a bit of a pickle over this one.
I think so.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello there, welcome back to the show on today, Good Friday. Let's go to calls now and speak to Laura Jane, who's in Hampshire. Good morning to you, Laura Jane.
Good morning. An enormous thank you to you for referring to the Easter feast. I'm Roman Catholic, Christian, and I was thinking when you were speaking that I wonder why we're all slightly ever embarrassed when we talk about religion and money and success and all of those things. And I think that's one of the reasons why we're afraid, and I think you were very brave to say what you did, not just because, I mean, it's not you, but it's just that we have this slight embarrassment, and that's the problem of Christianity, certainly in this country, is we're not strong enough to stand up. And that's why I think, Muslims in many ways are more successful at it, because we're embarrassed. And I feel that that's a great shame, and that's why it was so wonderful to hear you say those things and acknowledge the fact that some of us are going to be going to church on Sunday. I'm going to the Stations of the Cross this evening, and those things we're slightly embarrassed about talking about, money, success, religion. It's kind of been inculcated into us not to do that.
I think there's been a very active agenda, particularly coming from the left wing, to trash Christianity, to try and rid it out of society, because very often what socialist governments want, what socialists want in general, is to basically dissolve religion so they can put their own archaeology of a belief system in its place. And yet what they don't realise is when they're using words such as we must have tolerance, we must do this, we must protect the weak, they're using the teachings of Christianity. And you rid the world of Christianity and you go back to the barbarism of ancient times and see how you survive then.
Communism, aka Stalin.
Right, I'm glad you brought up as well the big differences between Christianity and Islam. Of course, as a Christian and as a Catholic, it's very difficult to know how to approach this subject, because Islam was created a century later and then said, I've looked at Judaism, I've looked at Christianity, good ideas, I'm going to nick them, but we're now the one true religion. You've got to believe in us or you're in big trouble. And it is very much a campaigning religion. It wants the decimation of all other belief systems, a habit it shares with socialism, some might say.
But we don't.
But we don't.
Christians, we don't. We basically do not say that.
What a Christian does when they encounter some of the different belief system is to quietly pray that perhaps they may too also be able to enjoy solidarity and the love and the faith that we all share as a Christian community.
And the other thing, which is at the opposite end, is to mention the dreaded, the wonderful Supreme Court announcement, is how difficult it is in the divide, because my eldest son, he's a ballet dancer, he's gay, and he has very strong views. And we had an interesting WhatsApp conversation between London and Hampshire, and I think Easter Sunday is going to be quite fiery over the lunch table. He obviously feels very strongly, and I feel that it is going to be a difficult path forward. I'm absolutely thrilled that at last we can say, we are women, that's it, end of conversation. But the young, he's 33 downwards, find it very embarrassing when they're grown up adults.
Oh, we're losing you there a bit, Laura James. I think the sort of outer space monsters have invaded our feed from Hampshire, or maybe it's a sort of naughty little New Forest pony chewing on a phone line somewhere. But just reflecting on what Laura Jane's saying, so we're going to be talking about the Supreme Court ruling after the break. There has been so much shame attached to deviation from the hard left ideology. Unless you believe in this, you should be cancelled. You will pay the price. You will suffer. It's not just a case of, well, it's a nice thing to think this. No, the radical left have forced certain issues down our throats and made it very difficult for us to speak out. And I want to reflect on the poisonous James O'Brien on a different radio station, who didn't quite know how to handle this judgment at the Supreme Court, did he? He had a bit of a meltdown and was saying, oh, isn't it terrible? All these things that Donald Trump has done. And I thought to myself, a man on the left who'd like to shower themselves in moral rectitude, this wasn't Trump who did this. This wasn't a man 1,000 miles away in America who was only elected into office back in December. This was the hard work of women. The women of Sex Matters, Maya Forstater, Helen Joyce, J.K. Rowling, other unseen, unnamed women who have been attacked, persecuted, thrown out of their jobs, threatened with the most heinous, horrible attacks on social media, who have been ostracised from society, vilified as TERFs. This has been the hard work of women fighting for women's safety. And there he is, big misogynist in chief, accusing Trump of being misogynist and saying, oh, Trump's done this. Wake up. What did Donald Trump have to do with that Supreme Court ruling? This has been the energy, the activity and the sacrifice and the dedication and the wherewithal of women. OK? Reality check, Mr. O'Brien. OK, we're going to be discussing more about that Supreme Court ruling after the break.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello there, and good morning to you on Good Friday. Now, finally, common sense prevailed, didn't it, with that ruling from the Supreme Court that biological sex is exactly that. It's biological sex. Women are women. They can't have penises and testes and all these other things. Men are men. They can't have ovaries and all the rest of it. And that is, frankly, how it's always been and how it always will be. Thank goodness for that decision. But businesses and public bodies may now need to change some of the way they've been doing things by providing neutral third spaces to accommodate trans people. That's according to the chair of the UK's Equality and Human Rights Commission, because finally we have enshrined, well, one hopes we have in law, though it is a bit more complex than this, making sure that women's sport is for women only, biological women, and that single-sex spaces are enshrined within protections. Let's speak now to Debbie Hayton, journalist and author of Transsexual Apostate, My Journey Back to Reality. Debbie, it's always brilliant having you on the show. Now, I can imagine there'll be outrage from certain quarters when I say this, but I don't see anything wrong with saying this, is we already do have a neutral third space in many bathrooms. We have women's loos, we have men's loos, although some organisations and schools and office buildings have decided to only put in unisex toilets. Hopefully that will change. But we've always had the disabled toilet, which acts as a space for people who might need special accommodation, let's say, within society. What's wrong with using a disabled toilet, perhaps?
Well, there isn't, as long as there's plenty of facilities for the disabled people as well. The fact is, there is already a range of provision and people can get by. It's been interesting, actually, to hear so many businesses and organisations come out with a line that they support their trans community and are playing this quite loud. But let them put their money where their mouth is now. For too long, businesses have supported the trans community by asking women to make room and budge up. Well, perhaps businesses can now put some money into this and actually invest in more third spaces.
I mean, this should have been simple from the beginning, that especially when it comes to things like women's sports, where there is without a doubt a physical advantage to being born male, that it was absolutely ridiculous to assume that a man who's become a woman in his mind, perhaps, could compete equally with women in swimming or boxing. And you would think as well, when it comes to other things such as schools, brownie guy groups, where little girls need to be protected as they go through bodily changes and teens hit puberty, and safeguarding should be at the forefront of the leaders of those organisations' minds, that there should have been no way whatsoever that men can access these spaces. And yet so many now are going to have to undo a lot of stuff that's been pushed through rather dramatically. And Labour now are in turmoil and very split on this, whether or not to back this sort of radical unpeddling of some of the sort of, more pernicious things that have been put into place. Do you have any sympathy with the Labour Party over this?
Well, I think we need to hear some leadership from Keir Starmer on this. It's one thing to say we'll note the judgment, but what is the government, what is the Labour Party in power going to actually do about this? How is the Labour Party going to protect women's rights and trans rights? Not trying to fudge them together and hoping that people make do, but actually do the job properly. That's what they need to lead on.
Debbie, where do you think all of this stuff came from? This campaigning to sort of say any man who identifies as a woman is therefore a woman and should be able to go into changing rooms and swimming pools and all these other things that sort of frankly make me feel very terrified. Because I don't think that historically many trans people were pushing for this sort of thing, and I would imagine it's had a very negative impact on the genuine trans community, who, because of this sort of, extreme, relentless, at times vile and bitter campaign to try and force women to accept men into their spaces, that perhaps it's really had a negative impact on the trans community as a whole and people who never asked for this sort of campaigning.
Well, you're right. And I started writing about this issue back in 2016 when this idea of self-ID was first proposed. I thought it was nonsense at the time. I thought it would impact on everybody's rights. I could see how it was going to impact on women's rights. But the effect on confidence, there's just a total lack of confidence in law and policy. And that I didn't think would be helpful for anybody. To get back to reality and say, look, we're going to base our policy on biological sex. We all know what that means. We all know where we stand on that, and then we can move forwards from there. For 10 years, policy's been tried to be made on wishful thinking, and it's just not worked.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I've heard is certain people were promised certain rights which they never even held in the first place. Have you found there, you know, a more sort of hostile approach to you during this? I mean, it's been such a bitter and vile campaign. You must have suffered personally a lot.
Well, online, certainly. Online, there's abuse comes in from all sides online. But once I get back into real life, people are just not really interested in me being trans. I don't impinge on anybody else's rights. And my friends, my colleagues are more interested on how I can do a good job, how I can play my part in society as a human being. That's what really matters.
Yeah, I often think a lot of these debates just silo people within categories and pit one side against the other, where most people in life want to be not invisible, but be able to go about their life without being the glaring focus of unwanted attention. What do you think needs to happen now going forwards? It's great to hear that the Equalities Human Rights Commission is basically saying, right, this now needs to be activated and certain laws need to be made to protect single-sex spaces. Do you think that we need to start hearing an apology, perhaps, from some of those campaigners, the weakness of the politicians who absolutely rode roughshod over women and girls' safety and actually allowed under their watch and their spinelessness this campaign, this nasty, abusive campaign against people simply saying, hey, girls need to be protected? Do you think that they need to be forced to make an apology?
Well, an apology would be nice, Alex, but what we're more likely to hear is talk that we thought this all along, really. You know what people are like. They will try to rewrite history to make them on the right side of it. That's what people do. I think we should just take heart that sanity has been restored here, and we can now move forwards, not on wishful thinking, but in sound common sense.
I hope that you are right. It's always amazing to me how politicians can suddenly go, I always thought that was the case. Well, you know, I said it because it was the right thing to say back then. You always hear politicians say it's the right thing to do. You don't get to decide what's wrong or right. Debbie Hayton, thank you ever so much, and thank you for backing women and being part of this fight. You know, one thing I said the other day on social media, and I think it is worth thinking about, you know, yes, we need to be happy that the Supreme Court ruling has gone back to the world of common sense and moral rectitude. But this has been a major red flag in our society. The fact that in the 21st century, women have had to go to the highest court in the land just to be called women, just to have an identity, just so they know when mothers send their daughters on a school camp, a male teacher isn't in that tent with them. Just so they know that when a woman wants to try and excel in a sport, she is not going to be violently outdone by a man in a male body. Just so women can actually be called women. How on earth does that reflect on our society? And look at it like this. If J.K. Rowling had wanted to get the Harry Potter books published 5 years ago, every single publisher would have turned their nose up and said, absolutely not. No way. You hold dangerous, damaging, disgraceful views. You must be persecuted, ostracised. We must do everything possible to prevent you having any sort of foothold in society, you monster. And then millions, if not billions, of children worldwide would not have been able to pick up a book that gave them escapism, that taught them life lessons, that gave them literacy that they could relate to, that echoed narratives of morality, of strength, of independence and of learning. All of that brilliant material would have been in the dustbin of history at the altar of a few vociferous, nasty, divisive types who didn't care about anything else other than tugging their forelock and being part of a luxury ideology because it to them was basically a Gucci handbag. And that's what this stuff is. It's the vanity of politics. It is vanity politics in itself. I'm supporting trans. I'm a trans ally. Isn't it wonderful? Look at me. Aren't I fantastic? Oh, it's so cool. Look how many Hollywood couples now have a trans kid. You do realise that this involves radical, life-changing surgeries, that hormones that will forever change someone's ability to return to their normal voice, to bear children, mutilations, the likes of which should not be carried out on little children, mind-bending brainwashing that encourages what is actually a psychological disorder. Why? Just to look cool and progressive? People who've done that, they disgust me. They disgust me. They're the ones who tried to shun other people who were fighting for what they knew was a just cause from public life. They now should be the ones sent to Coventry. They should be given no platform and no airtime because they pushed out those horrible, toxic, dangerous and divisive views and wanted to persecute anyone who stood up for common sense. Although, because I'm a Liberal, I don't believe in actual cancellation. I don't mean a Liberal Democrat. I know I look a bit like that today. I mean a proper one, a right-wing one. Right, I've chunted on for too long now. Keep your thoughts coming in, 0344 499 1000. We can talk very quickly to Georgina, who is in London. Hi, Georgina.
Good morning. Well, good morning, good morning. What a fabulous speech. Bravo, my darling. That was wonderful.
Thank you.
I just want to say I am delighted with the Supreme Court ruling that women are now women, but I do have a thought on how Keir Starmer, that snivelling little weasel, is going to get out of this situation. He's going to turn around and say, yes, 99% are women, but that 1% are the hermaphrodites or the intersex population, which makes up 1.7% of the global population. That is a human being that's born with both sets of genital organs. So that's the way he's going to say, well, some are born with penises.
Well, that might be the way. I think what he will probably do is echo his favourite word, because at the end of the day, that man is a prosecutor, not a politician. He's got no belief system himself. He's not even got any spine. He just goes, we must obey the rule of law. It is what the courts have decided, and so it is imperative that we follow that judgment. Because that's all he does. He's a weak, spineless drip of a man who, if you dug around inside his head and his heart, you would struggle to find even one cell in his body that captures anything of any sort of independent or creative thinking. He's just an automaton, the chief sheep, the idiot now in charge of running the country. And believe me, he's an idiot who is quite dangerous because he's so passionate about following the rule of law. I must prosecute. I must do what I can to deliver justice. I will never think outside the box. That actually, when you get people like that who are so bound in the socialist belief system, they end up actually doing the most despicable things. So good luck to the UK. That's what he's probably going to say, Georgina. We must respect the rule of law. That's what I think. Georgina, thank you ever so much for your call, my darling. Right, when we come back, are you planning to go anywhere over this 4-day weekend? Are there relatives that you want to go and see? Perhaps you want to enjoy some of the good weather and have a little break somewhere in a more beautiful part of the United Kingdom? Well, if that is you, you might find that there are going to be some severe travel warnings, because guess what? It always happens, doesn't it, over the Great Easter Getaway? That is coming up after this.
what it boils down to is a legalization of illegal migration, because when you take the one who arrived here illegally and you replace him by one that's been sent to us by France legally, that we've effectively legalized illegal migration. Are you with me?
Yeah.
And so nothing could do more than to encourage people from their general movement from Syria, North Africa and elsewhere into Europe than this scheme.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello, welcome back. Now, do you know what? Being a car driver in this day and age, there's more hassle than it's worth, frankly, especially in London. Here's a little story for you. So a few weekends back, I was going to see a very good friend of mine in Kent. And unfortunately, a couple of junctions on the M25 were closed. The junctions I'd have needed to take to go and see him. So instead, I was faced with the daunting prospect of having to wend my way south out of London and go through the back alleys to get there. But good old Hammersmith Bridge, which has been closed for 5,000 years and stands no chance of reopening, definitely not to traffic. That, of course, was still the pig in the poke, as my sat-nav said, oh, fancy going over this bridge? No, thanks, mate. That hasn't been open for about 10 years. And then the next bridge along was also closed. And when that happens in London, you don't move. You are stuck in nose-to-tail traffic that doesn't even move an inch. And so 45 minutes I spent on one road trying to get to the next bridge down after that. And seriously, just 45 minutes at a complete standstill. Nothing. Nada. Then all of a sudden, I heard the sounds, woo, 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 behind me. And so the cars start to gently move an inch and try and make way for an emergency service vehicle. And as all the crowds started to shift, I found myself in a position where I could move forward and turn left and get off that road. And I thought that is the sensible thing to do. So that's what I did. I turned off the road, realising that there was no way going forward in this nose-to-tail traffic, trying to make more space for the emergency service vehicle to pass. And so went down that road and had to put in my sat-nav, send me back home. I am not going to be able to get to Kent. And so I followed my sat-nav around and finally ended up back home. Then yesterday, a letter comes through my letterbox from Hammersmith Council saying that apparently I had driven down one street in particular the wrong way and I wasn't a resident, and this is now a clean air neighbourhood. And because I'd followed my sat-nav to get out the way of an emergency services vehicle and happened to drive down this very road on this very day in a particular direction and wasn't a resident of Hammersmith, then I was going to have to pay a £130 fine. Make it make sense. Someone who does make sense of travel is Lisa Minnow, the travel editor of The Sun. Lisa, great to have you on the programme. That's my little rant about the nightmare of living in London and having a car. But a nightmare that embraces a lot of drivers up and down the country is, of course, potholes. 2 in 5 have said they've been hit by potholes in a pretty significant way. I mean, people might laugh at things like, well, it's just a bit of a gnarly old road, but this can cost thousands of pounds of damage to our vehicles.
Well, of course, you're right. Yes, it can. And, you know, it is something that the government did pledge, the last government pledged that they were going to cancel HS2 and spend the money on potholes. We haven't actually seen any progress on that since then, have we? It is very frustrating for drivers, and particularly on a day like today. We've got 20 million people on the roads today heading off on their Easter holidays.
Yeah, so what does that look like? There are travel warnings aplenty ahead of this Easter weekend. How is it all looking? The roads, the railways, the airports, of all the people who want to potentially use this 4-day break to go and see people they might miss?
Well, the roads are as you would expect. It is extremely busy out there. The M1, as your presenter just said, is closed. There is big traffic on the M1. The M25 is its normal car park. I can't help you there, I'm afraid. Up to the west of London, it's just diabolical. The M4, M5 interchange down in Bristol, that's also really busy at the moment, as is traffic around Birmingham and Manchester. So, I mean, the best time to travel really would be first thing in the morning or later in the evening. On the trains, there's over 300 different engineering projects this over the bank holiday weekend, so it can get to be really busy for you. Make sure you check before you travel. There are no trains from Euston to Milton Keynes for the entire weekend, and no southeastern trains calling at London Victoria, so again, check before you travel. And the lucky ones are those 2.2 million of us who are heading away from our airports this weekend, hopefully getting off to some sunshine. City breaks in places like Dublin and Amsterdam, they're doing really well. There's a little bit of a snarl up at Gatwick. We've got some strike action at Gatwick, but hopefully that won't impact many people. It's only a certain number of flights, about 50 people on strike. So hopefully that will still be quite a smooth getaway, and lots of staff being drafted in to help with that as well.
I mean, yeah, that is if you can get to the airport, one assumes. Lisa, thank you ever so much. It's always great to catch up with you. And there you go. That was your travel update. You'll hear them pinging throughout the course of the next few hours here on the radio station as we continue to update you about what our roads might look like. It's always worth, if you're planning to go somewhere over Easter weekend, of checking before you travel and driving safely. And what better way to make that journey, especially if you're stuck in tailbacks perhaps, than staying tuned to this radio station to keep you entertained and to keep you informed as well, because nowhere else is the home of common sense. I've just had a message here from, I think, Lindsay. We travelled from Kent to Wiltshire and back to be hit with 50-mile-per-hour limits for a majority of the journey due to the Highways Agency testing system. I don't know if this involves the M4 per chance, but as someone who often travels to Wiltshire and Gloucestershire myself, there's this huge section now of the M4, which is this 50-mile-per-hour zone that goes on forever and ever. And discernibly, I can't see why. It's just a load of traffic cones. So there's not a single, vehicle on it. There's not, no one's doing any work there. I can't see anything palpably happening that means that lane has to be closed. I know it's supposed to be broadening or building a new hard shoulder, but what you've got for a good sort of 5 miles is just traffic cones with not a soul in sight. And last summer when I was driving through France, the length and the breadth, I'm not necessarily advocating this as the best approach, but when you did have on French motorways, which are pretty good, yes, you pay a hefty toll for them, but they're in pretty good nick, what you do have when you have these sort of planned roadworks is a sort of one little bit of area with cones shrouding the men who are actually working on the road, and you have to drop your speed by about 10-20 kilometres per hour, and that's it. You get there, you pass them a bit slower, and you go on. In the UK, for some reason, we seem to feel the need to just put in place miles of traffic cones before we even get to wherever they might be doing the roadworks. And more often than not, there's not even anyone there, and you think there's got to be a more sensible way of dealing with things as we expand our motorways. A lot of them, of course, where they sort of came up with these mad ideas to let people drive in hard shoulders, and are having to create new hard shoulders. Honestly, just driving in the UK today is an absolute nightmare. Brian says, morning Alex, the fight back has started. You and everyone at Talk, please keep up the good work. That's Brian in Worthing. Regardless of the Supreme Court's ruling, a woman is an adult female human being. Oddly, no one seemed to be confused over the definition of a man. I know, this is what I mean. It's a red flag of misogyny, I think. Alex, with the biological sex definition confirmed, can we now officially rename the progressives as regressives? I think we can just call them morons, quite frankly. Right, after the break, we're going to be catching up with Baroness Claire Fox on all the news stories this week. We also want your thoughts coming in on all the topics we have been discussing. So pop the kettle on, don't go anywhere. I'm with you for the next 2 hours. See you in a moment.
We've been talking this morning about a new theme park which is going to be built. The Universal Studios apparently are going to build it in Bedfordshire. We've been asking many of you to give us some ideas for theme parks. Alison in South Wales says in the new theme park at 5 p.m. every day they could have the PIP parade. All the people driving their brand new Motability cars.
Instead of the water rapids,
You can have a road you go down that's full of potholes in a car with bad suspension and flat tyres. I don't know why they're bothering building a theme park in this country. They're going right, no one will be able to afford to go to it anyway.
How about the Rachel Reeves ride, says Terry in Birmingham. You go round and round and vanish up your own deficit. It's the HS2 ride. It travels at high speed for 10 feet, where everyone gets off and into the replacement bus ride. Tickets are £50 if bought 5 months in advance, or £1,000 on the day.
There's a strong rumour going round that Rachel Reeves is going to have a kissing booth for this theme park. So what I do, mate, I shove a £5 in a pot and you can go in and fill your boots.
Thank you very much indeed, and very generous of you. One from G, who says fast-track entry to every ride for illegals, plus a free night stay in the park's hotel and free food. New theme park bumper cars will have to pay a congestion charge, and the funhouse isn't built yet, despite Angela Rayner's pledge to build houses. And what about Ghost Train doesn't move because the driver's on strike? Have a good day. This is brilliant for the theme park. How about grow your own cannabis farm? Yeah, that's a good one. An Ethiopian safari park, narrated by Angela Rayner. Says Gary in Durham. How about that? This sums up the Labour Party to me. The one idea they have to improve growth for the economy is to basically have a bloody big fun fair. It's the type of idea primary school children would pitch, given 10 minutes to come up with something. Well, it turns out, Matt, in Royston, that it's not even their idea. But they're now trying to claim it's their idea, even though it was actually the Tories.
They have done brilliantly on breakfast, but you know on Drive you've done brilliantly as well. Downhill slide ride surrounded by ULEZ cameras so that people are fined on exit. Love it. You could have a Birmingham-themed whack the rat stall. If you whack the rat, you can have your bin emptied for free. On the Labour theme park, a house of mirrors where they're all boarded up because they can't bear to look themselves in the eye.
I've got a great one for you, mate.
This is for the is this for the Universal theme park run by Labour?
Moat right around the park.
Yeah.
With loads of dinghies. Call it the channel and say anyone who can break in, all is free.
Imagine a Scouser say you can break into a theme park for free.
Hi, Jeremy.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello, welcome back to the show. It is Good Friday today, and I just want to remind the audience I am going to try on Good Friday to do what most other platforms and organisations don't do, which is talk about Easter, because this is a Christian country, and I think all too often our values and our culture, which is fundamentally underpinned by Judeo-Christian teachings, is thrown in the dustbin. It's swept to one side. It's taken for granted, if it's not even vilified, to make space for imported cultures, which frankly clash with our own. And so I do want to take a moment now and then periodically throughout the show to reflect on what Good Friday means. To me, Good Friday is the day that a man who I believe was the Son of God, but regardless of what one believes, a historical figure, who genuinely was trying to teach people decent lessons of how to live their lives, to be good neighbours, to be good friends, to have courage, to not live in fear, but to have faith, to be kind to one another, and to share the common denominator of love. Because fundamentally the teachings of the Bible are about love, but not weakness, not tolerating evil. Actually, the Bible says one must stand up to these things, and Jesus himself very often did this, and his teachings held a mirror back at society's failings. And along the way, he was able to demonstrate to people that there's a better way of living, not to self-indulge, not to throw stones in glass houses, but to believe in something bigger than themselves, to realise their position in the universe, the frailty of humanity. And on Good Friday is the day that this man who tried to shine a light into the darkest corners of our world was taken and nailed in the most vile way, the most brutal, inhumane manner possible to a cross. And he went there knowing that his death was going to be the thing that actually atoned for all of our weaknesses and our sins. And yet, the crowds were bribed, encouraged, planted, the baying mob, to demand that he was nailed to the cross while a violent criminal was set free. To pick evil over goodness, to pick societal danger over that which safeguards and protects. Doesn't that not have echoes in some of the things that have taken place recently? Does that not to you reverberate when you look at some of the marches that have taken place backing organisations that have raped and murdered and slain, that preach intolerance, that want to destroy everyone but their own narrow, wicked belief system? Does it also not reflect how easily people went along with a belief system that really wasn't good? Well, maybe not a belief system, but what became societal mores. Back this evil person. This man is wicked. Send him to his death. Cancel him. And they went along with it spinelessly because it seemed like the cool thing to do. It seemed like everyone else is doing it, so I'm not going to be the brave one who stands up. And the weakness of the politicians who bowed down to it, who didn't speak out, who were more concerned about keeping a cap on what they perceived to be a moral danger. Well, you know, if this guy's so popular, it's going to unravel the control we have over society. Better to throw this person in prison than to allow the sensible things that they may be saying to jeopardise our stranglehold on control. Does not what happened to Jesus on Good Friday still echo today? I think it does. Right, that was my little Alex Bible bit for this hour. Let's speak now to Baroness Claire Fox, Independent Peer and Director, Academy of Ideas. Sorry to put you on the spot, Claire, but I have been asking my top of the hour guest what Easter means to them. Have you got any thoughts on Good Friday?
Well, I'm a cultural Irish Catholic, so of course it means quite a lot in that sense. And on Good Friday, just like to say, at 3 o'clock, I always take a moment to reflect and listen to some music, because there's some very beautiful pieces of music being written about the crucifixion, and look at some art. So that's my contribution. So, of course, I understand the significance of it for people with faith, but also culturally, we can't understand, you know, most of literature makes references to the thorns, the cross, and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of cultural references. So people should know about it and understand what it means significantly for society over the years. That's my bit.
Well said. Thank you, Claire. Right, now, talking about things happening societally, I'm sure you, like most of us women, very much celebrated what went on in the Supreme Court, that ruling that, guess what? Women are women. Who would have thunk it that perhaps women and girls ought to be protected from men coming into spaces where they are vulnerable, where they need integrity, playing in their sports? To me, this has been a huge red flag of quite what's going on in society at the moment. And I don't hear enough people talking about this. How it took people having to campaign and go to the Supreme Court to defend that safeguarding. Yes, it is a victory, some might say, for common sense, but at the same time, to me, it casts a very, very long shadow about things that have gone extremely wrong in the 21st century.
Yeah, I think that sometimes in the midst of this victory, we can forget exactly what has been required of us. Because not only were we told, despite knowing different, that we had to accept that somebody could change sex just through willing it, and so a man could say I am a woman, and we had to nod along on pain of being cancelled if we didn't. But we were coerced into endorsing it. You know, it wasn't even enough to stay silent. You were told that you had to use particular pronouns, that you had to acknowledge them, and so on and so forth, become an active ally. And I think that in a society where we've coerced people into completely going against material and biological reality, with political cost of destroying people's careers and reputations, and really demonizing anyone who wouldn't go along with that. We've silenced far too many people. We've also allowed some people to be thrown under the bus, and it bodes badly in general, doesn't it? Because you can coerce anyone to say anything if you can do something as fundamental as that.
Yeah, I mean, this is what I find so incredibly dangerous. And because so many people drank the Kool-Aid and went along with it, I think a lot of it is vanity politics. I think a lot of people go along with this stuff because they've been forced to believe it's the right thing to do, and they have no spine and they have no courage to actually reach deep within themselves and actually find that little nugget of common sense that may still exist. A lot of people, particularly in the Labour Party, are finding it very difficult to now row back from their entrenched positions that once upon a time they felt so confident in shouting about while demonising the rest of us. A health minister in the Labour Party has refused 4 times to say which changing rooms transgender women should use. How on earth do you think Keir Starmer is going to handle this? Because what I've noticed in the aftermath of this Supreme Court ruling is a deafening silence from the top.
Yeah, I mean, we've got an issue here, which is that leading trade unionists like Joe O'Grady from the Union of College, UCU, what's that, University College Union, and I think also the head of Unison, have basically said, we stand with our trans allies, we don't accept the Supreme Court. And that matters for the Labour Party because it shows that those people at the top have been embroiled in creating this fantasy world on the one hand and policing it. Because when you look at people like Kathleen Stock or Joe Phoenix, many people who worked in universities, it was their own trade unions that actually discarded them and in fact collaborated with the bosses, as it were, to get them into trouble, very often leading to them being forced to take out employment tribunals. You were using the example of the health minister who refused to say where women should get changed. But the context of this, of course, is that nurse in Scotland, Nurse Peggy, who's had to go to an employment tribunal because she's been forced to do that because she didn't want to share a changing room, get changed, a health worker, frontline health worker, with Dr. Beth, in inverted commas, Upton, I think his name is, who was in, and she's been really treated incredibly badly by her own health trust. And she's actually taking them to a court. We've also got the example of the Darlington nurses who've had to set up their own trade union in order to defend their right to get changed at work. So I'm saying this because for the Labour Party, they start to have to decide, are they on the side of rank and file health workers, frontline workers, women, or are they going to side with the union bureaucrats who, as I say, have completely been the enforcers of gender ideology in the workplace? And I find that very dispiriting, but it also indicates, because, you know, I'm an old trade unionist, but I also think for the Labour Party, it shows you why they're squirming on this one. And I'm afraid they're not coming out on the side of the workers. They're trying to avoid definitively making clear that they made a mistake in the past. They want to clarify things now because they got it wrong when they went along with identity politics.
Yeah, and they went along with it, I think, largely out of vanity and weakness. A lot of this stuff amounts to people deliberately or willfully closing their minds to what should have been obvious in the beginning. And not just obvious, you know, I think it's very easy to underplay quite what was at stake here. When I think that without this, you could have a situation where a man can turn around and say, I identify as a woman, therefore I want to come and work in the brownies and sleep in a tent with little girls. That, to me, is just horrific, that we have had to fight so hard to dodge situations like that. And it's once again being framed as, you know, trans people are life's victims. Now, I have no doubt that genuine gender dysphoria is a deeply troubling condition, and people need to be treated with compassion, and people need to be given the ability to live in a way that doesn't make them routinely uncomfortable or feeling ostracised, and that I don't think there's anything wrong with creating provisions to make sure there might be a unisex toilet or a toilet that someone who is trans could use. But what really troubles me is this idea that they're the only victims, and that the idea that some people might be using these provisions for ill will, for reasons of fetish and sexual perversion and trying to, you know, get access to women's spaces for nefarious reasons didn't matter in the whole debate. That actually the safety integrity of 50% of the population was mortgageable. That, to me, really frightens me, and I think has damning reverberations and reflections in other areas of identity politics and other things that we still need to beat.
It's both the safeguarding, you're absolutely right, but it's also fairness. I mean, we recently had a pool championship final with 2 men who identify as women in the final. I mean, that drove out women pool players, right? And we've had a whole range of examples in sport in which speaking truth and reality will get you into trouble, get you driven off the sports team. I mean, there's 2 teenagers as we speak who've been disciplined by the Football Association. They're playing in girls' teams. Everybody says they want to encourage female football, right? They're playing in the girls' teams, and one of them said, "Isn't that a man?" She was disciplined, kicked off the team, treated as though she was a criminal, and a similar example has happened subsequently. And the Football Association say, this goes against our trans inclusive policy. So we have reared a generation of young people where you can't speak your mind. But it is interesting, Alex, isn't it? Because, you know, when we're having this conversation about who we're talking about in relation to trans people, you know, since the judgment's been made, various media channels, of course not Talk, have basically interviewed distraught trans women, I use that phrase advisedly, i.e. men identifying as women, and said, what do you feel? And it's like, well, first of all, it's fascinating to me that it's always men who identify as women they're interviewing rather than men identifying as women. Also, we've had another problem, which is that in schools, the vast majority of young people who say that they have gender dysphoria are young women who want to be boys. And if people can't see beyond the fact that that is something very troubling about how young women feel discomfort with their body and not just accept at face value, or indeed as schools are doing, going along with encouraging people to immediately say I was born in the wrong body, then we're only dipping our toe into the problems that this issue has raised.
I'm glad you brought that up, Claire. I want to dig into that a bit deeper, actually, because throughout history there has been a, you know, condition called gender dysphoria, which is pretty rare, but has existed. But by and large, about 75% of people who claim to be gender dysphoric are male. It is rather a uniquely male condition on the whole, not saying it doesn't go the other way around, but is dominated by men. And so there has been this huge change now that 3/4 of people presenting to gender clinics are girls. And yet we don't talk about that. It's almost as if girls don't matter anymore. They can be thrown on the bonfire when it comes to preserving and protecting the rights of migrant men from different cultures, or men who want to put on a dress and wear a beard and get titillated by the prospect. That actually fundamentally at all of this, we should be a society that protects our girls, because if we're not a civilised society, and yet nobody now is even asking those questions. I think you bring up a very important point. What do you think should happen now when it comes to single-sex schools? Because the government has now been urged to clarify how the Supreme Court ruling will affect single-sex schools. If there is a boy at the age of 15 who says, I'm a girl, I want to live my life as a girl, you know, who dresses as a girl, perhaps even was one of the, poor few, or poor many actually, that was forced on a medical pathway, should they be allowed into an all-girls school?
I actually think they shouldn't, because they are a boy. I think that you can say to that boy who wants to identify as a woman, you're 15, and, you know, maybe when you're 18, you can choose to live your life as you want. And it's quite possible that parents might or might not encourage their kids or otherwise in the way they dress or express themselves. But for schools, it's important that both material reality is maintained and that they don't confuse young people further by affirming what they want to be. I mean, you know, you can go in as a 14, 12-year-old, as a 10-year-old, as 11-year-old, to say to your teacher, I demand that you give me what I want. And generally, we understand that adults should say, not necessarily no. You might want that, but no, not while you're at this school. You have to stick with the rules of this school. And if it's a girls' school, the people in it should be girls. There's no such thing, in other words, as a trans child, in my opinion. There are young people who are encouraged to interpret the discomforts and some of the feelings that they have as a young person through the lens of gender ideology. That's what's gone wrong for so many young people. And I think that when a young person says, I was born in the wrong body, we as adults need to say, no, you weren't. Your body's wonderful. What's wrong? That's, you know, we should comfort them. We should encourage them. I can remember, I don't know about you, the angst and pains of adolescence in particular were terrible. I mean, people hate their bodies. There's all sorts of things going on. You don't understand it. You're mortified about. And what you don't need is some adult telling you that maybe if you're a tomboy or if you're a young boy who likes pink or all of the usual kind of caricatures, oh, the problem is you and you need to change your body, because there are consequences to this, because we have young women who now think that their greatest desire in life is to have a double mastectomy as soon as they can. I mean, think of the tragedy that adults have allowed that atmosphere to grow up. So when I hear the teachers' unions saying, we don't know what to do here, it's like, well, you should have always known what to do. And the fact that you've allowed into schools this really poisonous ideology to take hold, rather than explaining neutrally that there will be people who might think that they want to change gender, but they can't change biological sex. That's the factual reality that the Supreme Court has now explained, which should and can be taught. But anything that affirms or gives into social transitioning, like pronoun use and so on, I think is actually doing young people a great disservice.
Oh, I think it's wicked, Claire. I think it's a complete abrogation of safeguarding. Baroness Claire Fox, thank you ever so much. I always find it remarkable in a society that seems to constantly infantilise everyone. Oh, that's good. That's bad. Donald Trump mean and nasty. Oh, this is nice. This is the Be Kind movement. That everything's sort of, you know, filtered down to these banal silos. That when it comes to children saying, I want to change my gender, we've just said, yeah, go on then. What is that about? That's a very adult decision. As a child, you can't go and get a tattoo. You can't, as a 14-year-old, drive a car. You can't drink alcohol till you're 18. You can't get married. And yet, kids have said, oh, I think I might be in the wrong body. And parents have actively encouraged it, keeping up with the Joneses to look good to their neighbours. I mean, if that is not disturbing in our society, what is? I want your thoughts on all the stories we're talking about today. The number to call is 0344 499 1000. We're going to be doing some calls, fingers crossed, after the break. I'm certainly going to be reading through a lot of your messages. You can WhatsApp me on that same number, 0344 499 1000. The number to text 87222. Remember to write the word talk before your message, and I'm on X at talkTV. Your thoughts are coming up after this break.
This very nice woman doesn't want to have her name revealed because she's got a sort of senior post in Glasgow, goes cross-country skiing, flies from Edinburgh to Oslo, got a perfectly valid passport, but gets to Oslo airport and the Norwegian police do not understand the passport rules. They frisk her, they fingerprint her, they detain her, and then they deport her. And finally, yesterday, they got round to saying, not sorry, but a procedural error was made.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello, welcome back to the show. It is, of course, Good Friday, and my brilliant tech op today, Sam, has been doing the work of God by compiling people sending in their Good Friday messages. Thank you, Sam. Let's have a listen.
Andy in Portsmouth here. I wish you a happy Easter, Alex, and all the best.
Hi Alex, so glad that you've addressed our Christian faith in this country.
Hi Alex, this Christian holy day of Good Friday and over this very period of the next 2 or 3 days is important to us.
Good morning, Alex. What an excellent few days for women and your brilliant opening monologue.
Oh, why thank you. There's a little extra bit tacked on the end there. Less about Good Friday, a bit more about me. Oh, well. Good Friday is, of course, a very important day for Christians. I'm going to, whether you're a Christian or not, I think most people acknowledge that Jesus was a historical character. I personally think there's plenty of evidence that all the cool things happened as well. But it is the religion that underpins our society. And it's been so important. I cannot stress how vital it has been. I mean, if you look back to the Greeks and the Romans, of course, Israel was controlled by the Roman Empire in Jesus' time. They were the ones, of course, who put him on the cross. When you look at what those societies did, gladiatorial rings, the head of the household, the man being in charge of all bodies within it. Oh, they used to have wives, but they had their mistresses, the slave girls, the slave boys. When you look at some of the wickedness and things now that if they were to happen today in many parts of the world, they still do, we would find them absolutely morally reprehensible, disgusting and inhumane. Well, that humanity, the whole lot of it, was brought about by one man. Whether you believe in God or not, the impact of Christianity on progress in the world has been absolutely limitless. On the development of the West and everything that holds us together, on a morality that binds all peoples now. That alone is worth remembering, because if this man on this day had not been nailed to the cross, would humanity have seen that massive change which has enabled us to move forward, to be safe, to live in societies where we share fundamental values that do not imperil people? I think that needs to be stressed. And I think that also, you know, if you're someone who thinks, yeah, I'm a Christian, or maybe I'm not, but I like the cut of its jib and haven't been into a court, then a church, then maybe do that this Easter. Maybe take it as an opportunity to stick your head inside the door, because the great thing about churches, you don't need to be some card-carrying member. Everyone's welcome. And there are churches for all different kinds of people. You can go to a gospel church if you want the music and the uplifting, great spirit and energy of the occasion. You can go to a quiet little village church with a dedicated small congregation. You can go to a traditional church, hells, bells and smells. Or you can go to the sort of church I go to, HTB, that's my church, one of the Alpha networks, and where people play rock music on the stage. It's brilliant. There's electric guitars and drums, and it's just a wonderful, wonderful place to be. There are churches of all different kinds, and you can find the one that might suit you. And it doesn't mean if you go once, you've then got to keep going every Sunday, but perhaps if you find somewhere in your heart and soul you think, I haven't been for a while, or maybe you just go inside the building, right? Just stand in a church over the next few days in silence and let the energy baked into those historic bricks, the people who have been married there, the people who have had their christenings there, the people who have had funerals there, the mourning, the worship, the uplifting praise, the belief, the faith of centuries baked into that building. Sometimes you can just stand in a church with your eyes closed and you can feel it affecting your soul. It's a wonderful thing to do. Right, I was going to read some messages, but I've rather jabbered on, haven't I? Hi, Alex, I adore watching your show. You've persuaded me to go to church on Sunday, the first time in 36 years. Well, do you know what? If I've managed to just make one lost sheep go back in the right direction, then I've done God's work today. Alex, thank you so much for your religious sustenance. I'm on my own and suffering with poor health, and your sermon talk has helped. God bless you, Stephen. Stephen, I will pray for you today. Right, let's speak to Chris, who's in Epsom. Hi, Chris.
Hey, Alex.
Hello, my darling. What do you want to talk about?
Well, I love what you've been talking about with Christianity. Absolutely agree with you. And I reckon that we've got a same friend in the real world.
Who's that?
Nicky and Pippa Gumble.
Oh, Nicky Gumble. I love him. Now, for listeners who wonder who on earth this same friend is, and I don't know Nicky personally, blimmin' heck, I wish I did. This man, he actually got an OBE, I think it was an OBE from the King last year. Much deserved. Yeah. He has done more in the world to spread Christianity than anybody else. I was talking about the church I go to. It's known as HTB, Holy Trinity Brompton, but the HTB network is the fastest growing church network in the United Kingdom. They're planting churches all over the place. That's the church, of course, with the sort of rock music and the brilliant vibe. It is packed to the rafters. You can't even get a space in that church. No, seriously. You have to get there really early on a Sunday morning because it's like sardines. And when I look around the congregation, it's everybody you can think of. It's the old, it's the young, it's black, it's brown, it's white. It's everybody. And everyone just joins together in something that really moves you because it's just here we all are, all believing and worshipping the same thing. And it is pure, pure unadulterated happiness. And anyway, a good old HTB under the auspices of Nicky Gumble, who set up the Alpha course, has also been spreading the word of God and Christianity far and wide around the world. There have been huge success in China. The Chinese are taking up Christianity like you would not believe. It also does brilliant work inside prisons. Prisons, as we know, increasingly being dominated by Islamist gangs. How important is it that we actually have people in there teaching Christianity? So I do know. And actually, by the way, there is a brilliant app called The Bible in 1 Year, which is voiced by Nicky Gumble himself. Chris, I'm glad to hear from you. So I've talked all over you. Before I go to break, was there anything you wanted to say other than we both have Nicky Gumble in common?
Well, I would advise everybody to go and listen to Nicky because he has love in his heart for everybody and Jesus, and you can't help but be moved when he speaks. I'll do a quick funny story. Yeah. I've known him for 40-odd years.
Do you know him personally?
Yeah. I was with him 2 months ago. I prayed with him, and he gave me his Bible, and he gave me the Bible in a Year app. It's
brilliant. That app is amazing. You can listen to one little sort of bit every single day and it takes you to a different part of the Bible with a teaching. It's a bit like a school assembly almost. It's a brilliant thing. Chris, thank you ever so much for your call. Should you see Nicky Gumble again, tell him how important he is to me. This woman thinks he really is doing the work of God. He is a rare, rare gift. Thank you, Chris, for your call. Right, we're going to take a short break now. When I come back, we're going to be talking about teachers because they're set to strike this autumn over Labour's pay deal, which they say isn't as generous as perhaps other parts of the public sector have been given. But also this utterly awful, frightening story, which sadly does not surprised me one bit, that pupils are now attacking school staff with knives and fire extinguishers. Lawlessness in our classrooms. That's coming up after this.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello there, welcome back to the show on this Good Friday. Let's get into the world of education now, because we know that teachers are likely going to strike this autumn to make Labour MPs pay unless they get more cash. That is because a lot of the public sector have been given quite generous pay rises, some might say, in line with inflation and cost of living going up, but not so much the teachers. And so the unions are now urging that teachers go on strike in September. Let's speak to Christine Cunliffe, who is a head teacher. Christine, great to have you on the programme. Do you support this strike? Do you think it's right that teachers withdraw from the classroom in order to push for better pay?
No, I don't agree with striking at all. You know, I do believe in fair pay for teachers, but I don't believe that they should be out the classroom. The children have to come first. And being a head of an independent school, maybe some of this VAT that's been collected could go to pay for that pay rise, because at the moment it does seem to be ring-fenced for getting the 6,500 teachers that the Labour government promised.
So, do you think that basically teachers do deserve a pay rise, though, that they are woefully underpaid and they should actually be valued more in society?
I think we have to be totally realistic when we look at the profession itself. So, for example, if you had somebody who came out of university with a first-class maths degree, they're going to attract a huge salary working in other industries as well. But we don't work a 52-week contract. So is it time that we actually looked at education? Are we in school enough? Should we change the contractual terms and pay accordingly so that it is competitive with other industries?
I mean, how hard is teaching? There's a story today that just sends a chill down my spine. It's absolutely horrifying. It's 2/5 of teachers, so that's almost a third, right, have been physically assaulted by pupils in the last year. Some with knives and fire extinguishers. Teachers say they've been punched, kicked, shoved, spat at. Some primary school teachers have been threatened by pupils with weapons. I can't believe this. When I was at school, there was nothing like that. Absolutely. There might occasionally be one kid who tried to duff up the other kids and the teacher might have to sort of intervene to break it up. But the idea of pupils actually physically attacking the teacher seems to me utterly wild. What is going on in classrooms, Christine?
Well, look, I think things might have increased a little bit over the last 30, 40 years. There's always been problems there, and it is actually more reported. But if you look at this survey, this was done by one union that has 300,000 members. And I've seen reports that only between 5 and 10,000 actually responded to that survey. And normally respondents are the ones that have got a lot to say about things. So there are 650,000 teachers in the country. So this represents the views of probably 1% of the teaching profession. I'm not saying it doesn't happen. I think there are huge threats within schools and on an even larger scale. But I think this is a little bit sensationalist. And I think we don't focus enough on the good in the profession. And there's no doubt that teachers don't want to come in the profession because all they hear is strikes, violence, overwork, underpaid. It's got to change.
I mean, is it really as negative as all of that, though? Because that is what you hear. Oh, who wants to be a teacher? The pupils are uncontrollable. Who wants to be a teacher? The paperwork is insane. You're going to be sitting there doing your marking until midnight. Who wants to be a teacher? The pay is not worth it. I mean, actually, can we put a positive spin on teaching and explain to people how rewarding it is as a profession?
That's it, and we don't hear enough about it. So, I think what you have to remember that you actually change and shape the future of children, the future of this country. And there are thousands of teachers in this country who work tirelessly and time in their own time as well. It is a very rewarding profession. Okay, there are things that are not right at the moment, and it doesn't help that there's always political squabbles going on, especially with the union heads as well as both party leaders right across. They need to put their politics aside, focus on the positive, support us to enable the children to lead the future.
I mean, you're a head teacher. What do you tell your teachers? Because there's been accusations in a lot of schools that there's way too much woke in the classroom. There's way too much pushing of certain contested beliefs, be it critical race theory, be it gender identity, be it even recently whether Reform UK are a dangerous racist political party. As a head teacher, what's your approach to how teachers should talk about certain topics in the classroom?
I think every school should be an inclusive environment and respectful of each other. There has got to be very firm boundaries. And I think some of the problems there are with behaviour in particular is there are not enough sanctions. There's too many schools that can't either expel or find alternative provision for children who don't want to behave in school or follow the societal norms, the rules and regulations that bound us all together, not just in school, but in society as well. And that needs to be addressed. So as a head teacher, my message to everybody in our school is we work on mutual respect. There is a place for everybody. You don't hurt anybody. You don't be offensive. And the most thing is you're kind, and then you can get on with it.
But what about teachers who might be sort of pushing the frontiers of education a little bit, and instead of delivering the 3 R's, might be delivering some personal political opinions? Is there a space for that in the classroom, or is that something that you try and crack down on?
No, to be quite honest with you, if that's happening, that teacher needs to go. And for the very reason that the inspectorate, both Ofsted and ISI, that inspect the independent schools, say that teachers' views are impartial. They should not bring their views into the classroom unless it's part of a discussion about fact. We have to be careful. We influence children. We have to be careful to make sure they make their own minds up. In an age of AI, there's going to be a lot of false truths out there, and we have to teach them to search for the truth. And that means making sure that our views are impartial. And if any teacher in my school were to do otherwise, they wouldn't be working there.
Do you know, before I let you go, you've actually said something that's made me think of an entirely different question, because I'm 41. When I was at school, the sort of closest we got to technology was the floppy disk. And learning to do basic word processing on those computers that were the size of a caravan. But you must now, in schools, face all sorts of challenges, especially when it comes to things like homework, with kids and how they do their research and how they produce their material to be submitted. And also, of course, the disruption of having smartphones in the classroom. How's teaching affected in the digital age? It must be entirely different to when I was a kid.
I think it all keeps us busy, because when I started teaching, the internet had only just come into play. So you can imagine what I've seen over time. But yeah, I bet, and again, with mobile phones, we ban them during the day. They're in what we call yonder pouches, they're locked away, they can't be used. But we embrace technology because it is our future. And AI will open up a whole new way of working, looking for that truth, being able to be critical thinkers. But we have to develop the human side as well. So we have always blended learning and wonderful technology, but we have to deliver and make sure the children have skills for the future: collaboration, creativity, critical thinking, and communication, because that's the way forward. And we need to shape these young people for the future.
Couldn't agree more. Do you have a school assembly, by the way? I don't know what's gone on with school assemblies lately. Do you still do those?
Yeah, we do.
And are they sort of Christian in leaning, or are they not? So I suppose it depends on the school.
Well, we've got a really diverse community. We have 44 different nationalities in our school.
Wow.
We've got a Christian foundation, and I think, you know, we all find our space for an inclusive environment. So there is an element of Christianity, but it's embracing all religions and making sure that everybody's heard and everybody is part of that environment. And that's quite easily done. Quite easily done.
Christine, it's been wonderful catching up with you. Thank you ever so much. Do you know, I look back on school assemblies now, particularly the ones from primary school. You know, there were some 90s bangers, weren't they? Do you remember, like, Autumn Days? That was crazy, when they talked about jet planes meeting in the air to be refueled. You wouldn't get that under climate change now, would you? Absolutely fantastic song. And Colours of Grey, do you remember? The Colours of Day dawn into the night. I don't know. Sometimes every now and then I go on Spotify and I try and find sort of primary school assembly songs just to remind myself of all the fantastic things we used to sing. Would you walk by on the other side? I'm pretty sure now people are going to be looking on their phones and digging up some of the absolute 90s assembly bangers. So do let me know when you remember them, because it definitely brings me a lot of joy. Anne has messaged saying, Alex, as a Christian, you've made my morning talking about the importance of Good Friday and the Easter period. Thank you ever so much. For those who don't consider themselves Christian, we are still, I hope, considered a Christian society. Right, we're going to take a short break now. And talking about Christianity, apparently the Met Police have been holding an Easter egg hunt for their officers, including the counter-terror cops. Don't you worry about going to find people who are going to plant a bomb somewhere. Find an Easter egg instead. And what really beggars belief is that their kids haven't even been invited. What's going on? We're going to be catching up with a former frontline police officer after this.
What it boils down to is a legalization of illegal migration, because when you take the one who arrived here illegally and you replace him by one that's been sent to us by France legally, that we've effectively legalized illegal migration. Are you with me?
Yeah.
And so nothing could do more than to encourage people from their general movement from Syria, North Africa and elsewhere into Europe than this scheme.
across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello, welcome back to the show. Right, this story just, we laugh. If we didn't laugh, we'd cry. Because some of Britain's most elite policing units have come under criticism after organising an Easter egg hunt for staff at a major London hub for counter-terrorism. Officers employed at the Empress State Building in West London, which includes teams specialising in organised crime and counter-terror, are being offered the activity. And that was yesterday. Staff from any level of the building, including non-police partner agencies, are free to attend the hunt, but their children weren't welcome. The Easter egg hunt was advertised through posters on display without the 31-storey building. I mean, why do police officers need an Easter egg hunt? How old are they? 5? Let's speak now to Rob Hosking, who is a former frontline police officer. Rob, does this surprise you? Is this the sort of thing we find in policing up and down the country, do you think? Or is this just one particular balmy building that, for reasons known only to themselves, thought it was a great use of police time?
During my time, that would never have happened, but that was frontline policing. But I still would never have heard about something like that happening. I said on the show a few weeks ago that common sense no longer exists in policing up and down the country. And I think this is another example of common sense not existing. It just doesn't make sense in the slightest why they would be doing something like that. And I was looking earlier about this new hub for counterterrorism, which was built in 2021. And this is what police chiefs said about creating it. And they said, counterterrorism threats are multiplying and the style of attack is changing. Organised crime grows more complex and demands new responses. There is an ongoing urgency to create this hub. Doing nothing is not an option. Doing nothing is not an option, but doing an Easter egg hunt is apparently an option.
Well, maybe it's supposed to, I don't know, hone their detective skills. If they can find an Easter egg, perhaps they'll be able to find the hidden Al-Qaeda manual, I don't know. And what I do want to talk to you about is a former frontline police officer and somebody who now is on the outside able to talk about policing. How much is there a culture of fear and sort of a culture against whistleblowing? I ask you this because I was speaking to a very good friend of mine the other day who shall remain nameless, and he was telling me a particular story of something he had encountered as a policeman on his active duties that he just thought the public really needed to know. But he is so terrified about that story being publicised in case in any way he would be identified. If I even sort of describe the bare bones of what he wanted to talk to me about, I worry that someone listening might think, well, I know that particular incident and I know that police force and I know who was on that job. And then all of a sudden a man who is working very hard to protect a community and putting himself in harm's way might find himself out on his ear, because it seems to me another thing that he was suggesting to me is reprisals against police. It's enormous from within inside the police force. So someone makes a complaint about you. Someone says, oh, well, I think he made a racist comment. Then more often than not, as a policeman, you were automatically suspended, rather than it being innocent until proven guilty, as it should be in other parts of our justice system. It seems to be in the police force, guilty until proven innocent.
It's just guilty, full stop, usually in the police force with the police officers. But yeah, I think there's a difference there with what police officers have to deal with, where if there is an allegation against them, there is not I would say, a fair investigation or, someone actually balancing up the evidence. You know, police officers up and down the country use evidence to see if something needs to be brought into the court of law, but yet for themselves, there's not really needed to be much evidence. And I think people are too quick to put the guillotine down on police officers, to hammer them. So then police officers are afraid to make decisions. They're afraid to make mistakes, even though mistakes are part of life and mistakes will happen, yes. But they're so afraid to do it now because, the discipline that you'd get from doing it, it's not worth it. We look at, I've seen examples up in Scotland where the use of the taser exists with certain people. And using the taser, it's not worth it, because the amount of paperwork that you have to do and justification to actually, say why you've had to use it, the criticism that they get for it, you just think, why would you ever want to pull that trigger? And if we are in a society where our police are afraid to pull that trigger, whether it's a taser or a gun with these specialized units, I think there's a problem.
Yeah, we live in a very dangerous society indeed. If before a policeman can step in harm's way to protect the public, he has to think about mounds of paperwork he's going to do and the risk of potentially losing his job. Well, why did you leave the police force yourself?
I became disillusioned with it, so I did. I was done with it, and I remember I had a last ever shift which just kind of changed my perspective completely on life. And on my last ever shift, I witnessed a 21-year-old male take his own life, and I was there for him as he took his last breaths in this world. And as you can imagine, very difficult thing to do, but as a police officer, that's what you have to do, and you get on with it. However, 5 hours later, my colleague of 29 years service had a heart attack on shift and died in front of me. And it was a shift from hell, so to speak, but just completely changed my view on life. And the lack of support that I received after that, I thought just completely disillusioned me with the job. And I thought, you know, we're there putting our lives on the line. And when something happens to one of your own and you don't get that support yourself, because I just, you know, I broke down after that where I needed support and I didn't get it. I just felt like this is not an organization that I could be part of any longer.
I'm really sorry to hear that. What a harrowing experience for you. Do you think that the police have real problems in recruitment as a result of, you know, it changing fundamentally to people having freedoms within their profession to go out and make sure that they're fighting crime and enforcing the law, to actually having an institution that's so bound up now with bureaucracy and identity politics that it's becoming a bit of a hellish landscape within which to operate?
I think so, and just in my experience working in Police Scotland, I saw the recruitment criteria just getting less and less as time went on, because they were so desperate to get people in the job. So, you know, we used to have to do a bleep test, and you had to get to a certain level. Then they brought that right down to a minimum which you could do walking. Like, it was just ridiculous. And then they took away the need to have a driving license to join the job. And you think, wait a minute, if you're taking away these kind of things, if you're putting that level of you know, criteria that you need to just join the job, what kind of people are you getting to join the job? It should be a high level, you know, criteria that you need to meet. But they lower it. So when you lower it, what kind of staff's going to come in? And they lower it for a reason, because they struggle to actually get the staff. And you look nowadays, you look, the way of working also doesn't help with COVID and home working. So people are probably seeing a different way of life that they can do. But you look at policing and you think, who would want to be a police officer in this day and age? I wouldn't.
Yeah, I mean, I wish more people did, and I think the police actually deserve a lot more of our respect. I think the narrative that came over with the BLM stuff, the defund the police, the attack the police, the Chris Cabba case with that poor firearms officer who was sort of put through living hell for months, actually standing trial for murder. And I think to myself, any civilised society needs to have faith in their law enforcement, and we're very lucky in this country, as someone who's lived in different countries around the world. Believe me, policing in places in Africa is not free from corruption. It involves a whole lot of brutality that we certainly don't have here. And actually, the men and the women who, like you, served on our front lines deserve a bit of respect.
They do. I think some of the rotten apples that we see that make the news in the public, unfortunately, they ruin it for everybody else. But there's so many police officers who are working day in and day out, well, apart from when they're doing Easter hunts, but when they're working day in and day out to actually do a job to save their communities, to protect their communities, and don't get the recognition for it. It's very difficult because of the few rotten apples, and it's a difficult job because there is no recognition and there's a lot of hatred towards the police in their communities. And when you feel that hatred, when you feel that negativity, it's hard being a police officer, because, you know, fundamentally I joined the police to help people. That was it. I joined to help people. And when you felt like people were just hating on you and trying to stop you from actually doing your job, it's very difficult. And there are so many people who are doing great things out there. You know, I could count on both hands how many times I've talked someone down from a window ledge or a bridge to convince them to live one more day. But that stuff doesn't get recognised day in, day out in the news.
I think you're right. Rob, I think you're right. I always think the police really do deserve our full backing. I think we need to make them doing their jobs much easier. Rob Hosking, former police officer, thank you ever so much. I'm going to take a short break now, but believe you me, you don't want to go anywhere, because the greatest reunion, the greatest resurrection season Easter theme of all time is about to happen as I'm joined by my former co-host Kevin O'Sullivan. Back after this.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello, welcome back to the show. It is, of course, Good Friday, and so what I am trying to do, because so many other media channels don't do this, and what I think is an abrogation of duty against celebrating our own culture and our own civilization, is I'm going to talk a little bit about Easter and Christianity. I know, heaven forfend, how dare I do such a thing in today's society. It is, of course, Good Friday. So what does that mean for people who are Christian? And what does it mean for people who aren't Christian, but people who live in what, for a long time, for 2,000 years, has been a Christian country? Well, what we do know, and I think one thing we can all share, is that Jesus was a historical figure. There's ample evidence that demonstrates that this man did, in fact, live. He did, in fact, preach. And regardless or not of whether you then believe in the resurrection, as I do, and I would also argue that there's actually a vast amount of testimonial and eyewitness on that as well, if not even evidence. But regardless of whether you go down that route or not and consider yourself a Christian, a practicing Christian, a lapsed Christian, or even from a different religion, the fact of the matter is, in the West and in this country, the teachings of Jesus have underpinned our civilization for 2 centuries now. It is no coincidence that our rule of law, even our democracy, is bound by the 10 Commandments, the idea that one mustn't steal or kill or take someone else's wife, that adultery is wrong, that envy is poisonous. These might seem simplistic, but believe me, before the teachings of Jesus, we lived in a very different world. We lived in a world of barbarism, of extreme permissiveness, of society that was, in many respects, largely unbound by a common belief system, which has actually, I think, accelerated our advancement over the past 2,000 years. The dominion of Christianity has been the thing that has propelled the West to becoming probably the most advanced civilization that the world has ever seen. It has made us a peaceful, democratic country that largely, yes, we've had bloodshed, and yes, we've had civil wars. We've even had Catholics persecuting Christians and vice versa. But largely, what we have seen through the teachings of that man Jesus has been nothing but positivity. And so today, as we reflect on the fact that this man was brutally killed in the most vile of ways, it's important to also remember the circumstances that surrounded this. The fact that he humbly came in to Jerusalem knowing he was going to be facing his death on a donkey, not on a horse, not with, you know, a great bandwagon of people shouting, cheering, oh, you know, the king has come. Yes, they did that on the streets, but he came on a donkey because he just wanted to say, I'm humble. I don't want to be glorified and celebrated for wealth, for all these material things, for great power. I want to be celebrated for love and humility. And the crowds, when given a choice between executing Barabbas, a criminal, a vile man who had inflicted so much misery on society, or Jesus, who the authorities were scared of. They thought that he was a sorcerer at best. They thought that he was a risk to their stranglehold on order. And they needed him gone. And so they planted people within the crowds to become a baying mob, knowing that enough people say, persecute him, kill him, ostracize him, cancel him, that actually the crowd then goes along with it, even though many of them individually could probably see that this was the wrong decision to take. That has echoes, doesn't it, in things that we've seen recently in the 21st centuries. It has echoes when we see our authorities striving to defend people who mean harm to society, whose own mores clash with the 2,000-year-old civilizational underpinning of Christianity that we have enjoyed, that protects us all, that we find ourselves seeing weak politicians side with something that is so clearly wrong. Women having penises. The madness of such a statement, and yet the people who are leading our country went along with it because enough people in the baying mob were planted to force shame on everyone else and cause everyone to go along with something that has essentially destroyed the lives of countless children who are forced through surgeries and medical interventions, who will never get their lives and their bodies back. That wickedness prevailed because of the weakness of our leaders, because of the vanity of our leaders, because their desire to stay in control and have power at any cost, and because of the madness of crowds. Was that not the same circumstance that we learnt on Good Friday in the Bible? Right, there you go, and that's Alex's other little biblical teaching of the day. I'm going to now go to Kevin O'Sullivan. Interestingly, I've been asking every single guest to give me their thoughts on Easter. I can't think of a man less suited to the task. Kev, I know you are not a believer. I know you think that religion's all mumbo-jumbo. But it is Good Friday, so I'm going to force you to say something about it.
Well, first of all, Alex, it's a pleasure to be a part of your Easter Day service. I don't know. I'll tell you what I would like to do. Look, I'm not much of a believer, as you know, but I respect all religions, but I particularly respect the state religion of Britain, which is the Church of England, Christianity. And I would like to wish those poor kids at Norwood Primary School in Eastleigh in Hampshire a very happy Easter, because their head teacher has decided to deprive them of this special religious day, of their Easter services and the Easter bonnet parade that they have enjoyed for many years. A Church of England state school teacher has cancelled Easter at an English primary school, and on this day, very happy Easter to those kids, and I would like to ask the head teacher to reconsider or to think about what she's done. It's absolutely disgraceful. So a very happy Easter to all the believers, and a very happy Easter to all the non-believers.
Thank you, Kev. And actually, you made me think as well of something else we never talk about, because Christians aren't allowed to be victims, but they are the most persecuted peoples on earth. The Christians being murdered in Syria, the Christians being murdered in Nigeria. Oh, let's not talk about that. All we need to talk about is Gaza, because it's the right kind of victim. I think, it's something that we all need to bear in mind in the world. Now, let's talk about bringing it back home and what's been going on domestically, and that is the Supreme Court ruling that, guess what, Kev, you're not a woman. Who would have thunk? Great day for common sense. But I kind of think, if this isn't the wake-up call about the sort of wickedness, the mind-bending deception, almost, as a Christian, I'd almost consider it a devilish deception of society on things such as this, where actually it was possible that a man could go into women's toilets when they're changing rooms, or a male could go into a brownie's tent. It was sick. It was perverse. It was disgusting. It shouldn't have needed to go all the way up to the Supreme Court to stop it.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there were two things it was 2 days ago now, about that fantastic decision ruling by the Supreme Court. One was, thank God, that those 5 Supreme Court judges came to the right decision, and we finally, out of the darkness of the madness we've been going through for many years, we got a beam of common sense light. That was a great day, but you then have to reflect on, how did we ever get there? How did we in modern Britain come to a point where the 5 most senior judges in this land, allegedly the greatest legal brains available to us as a nation, had to spend 5 years deliberating on the question, what is a woman? A little kid knows what a woman is. And then when they finally come through with their ruling, it's 88 pages long. However, small mercies, let's not pick hairs now, because they came to the right decision. What is the scandal now, of course, is that our government, our Labour government, palpably hates this decision and palpably is going to do everything it can to undermine this decision. We had Karen Smith, the health minister, talking to our sister station Times Radio yesterday, 4 times refused to say whether or not men can now use female spaces, whether or not trans women are allowed into single-sex spaces. No, Karen, your little game, your little fantasy is over. The other person that we have to put on the spotlight now, I think as a nation, as a country, we must demand that our Prime Minister, a lawyer for God's sake, respects the law and announces to us that when he made that asinine assertion that, first of all, he said, the vast majority of women don't have penises. Then he kind of improved. He's on a journey. Later on, he said 99.9% of women don't have penises. No, Keir, you must now comply with the law, and you must say to us, the people of Britain, that 100% of women do not have penises. We cannot allow our government to disobey the law, to disrespect the law, and carry on with this nonsense that has plunged this country into insanity for so many years.
I would go even further, right? Because I remember Sir Keir Starmer basically saying, when asked, can a man have a cervix? Or, he said, it's wrong to say that. What they did was decide morality. They took it upon themselves to decide what was right or wrong based upon a newfangled, imposed belief system that frankly is wicked and twisted and perverse. And as a result, doctors, judges, teachers, politicians enabled the safeguarding of children to just be chucked under a bus, enabled kids to be mutilated, enabled women to be attacked in toilets, nurses thrown out of their professions because they didn't want to share a changing room with a man with a girt beard who was ogling their boobs. I think all of those people should not just be forced to apologise, but I actually hope that the Supreme Court ruling might usher in litigation against them. Now, I'm not a retributional kind of character. I kind of think forgive even forget. But if we haven't learnt the lesson of the darkness that once gripped us, that now we've frankly overcome, and people aren't told, you in your position were in charge of safeguarding and you failed to do it, these people need to be held accountable. I think these people now need to be forced to actually face up to what they have failed to do, the very professions that they were paid to look after kids, paid to look after people in the medical profession and preserve their dignity, and absolutely failed to do. I'm not going to rest easy until I see some sort of accountability be waged.
Well, Sharon Davis, who was on my show the other day, one of the heroes of the campaign against this nonsense, she is not a sort of aggressive, bitter kind of person. She said that she agrees with there should be lawsuits all over the place. And by the way, she is going to organise lawsuits against any sports club that continues to allow trans women, otherwise blokes in dresses, to compete against real women. She's going to sue them. And that's what we are facing now. This is going to be a long period of hard-line litigation against the continued forces of the left, the continued forces from Labour, who will rail against this ruling till their dying day, no doubt. It is a disgrace. It's brilliant that we've got here, but we have a government that's going to do its level best to stop it. And can I just make one more point?
Always.
The Equalities Commission today is saying, oh, well, you know, here's the big problem now. Organisations and companies and public buildings are all now going to have to provide third spaces for trans people. Why?
Yeah.
Why?
Why can't they use a disabled loo?
Yeah, how about we don't do that? You know, they'll work out a way. This is getting ridiculous. We cannot keep bending over backwards for whatever it is, 0.0002% of the population. Respect to them, live their lives how they want to. I really want them to do that. But we cannot carry on like this, bending to their every whim and, frankly, their unreasonable demands. How did we get to this Supreme Court situation? Why? Because they kept pushing their luck. They said, because I put on a dress, you have to call me a woman. So people like me, I went, all right, I don't want to upset you then. All right, you're a woman. I know you're not, but okay, her and all that, fine. Then, so a lot of us, even people like me, went, oh, all right, whatever. Then they go, now, you're right, now you've got to call me a biological female. You've got to say that I am biologically female. Oh, I see, you now want me to lie. You now want me to rail against the scientific truth. I'm sorry, I draw the line. And that's what the nation drew the line as well.
The pronouns game was always about bullying and control. It wasn't about people actually being mortally offended if you didn't use the correct pronoun at the end of the day. And yeah, I hope there is litigation. The only problem with it, of course, is if someone actually goes to sue a public sector entity, that we, the taxpayer, are the ones that are going to have to cough up for it, despite we never wanted any of this. It was imposed upon us. Talking about things being posed upon us that we're going to have to cough up for, net zero. Kelsey Breeze, the PM, could well be using a summit next month to align UK and EU emission trading schemes as part of a reset. Can't he just leave that declinist bloc alone? Why is he having to sort of go cap in hand to Brussels that he loves so much, despite us having a referendum saying take back control and put Britain first?
Well, you know, you might want to question why a man who doesn't know what a woman is, can't define a woman, is allowed to govern this country. And that may indicate why he is such an idiot and why he is cozying up to that sclerotic, failing, dying organisation, the European Union. But in this particular instance, he will do this. He's going to align with the EU's system on carbon emissions. So we are going to have to obey EU rules when it comes to our net zero policies, and it's going to immediately put up our energy bills even higher. As I keep saying, why on earth is Starmer and his gormless government, why are they looking to Brussels? They should be looking to America. And there's another problem with this net zero nonsense and his latest attempt to betray Brexit and to become a member or rejoin the EU in all but name. Donald Trump doesn't like it. Doesn't like the EU, and he doesn't like us cozying up to Ursula and her gang. So the more Starmer does this, the less likely it is we'll get a decent trade deal with America. Already, America, 2 days ago, JD Vance said maybe we get a deal. Now they're beginning to say, hang on a second, this Keir Starmer is too Eurocentric. We're not keen. So he could be screwing up our business deal.
Oh, yeah, I think he probably actively is. But let's see how this plays out over the next couple of weeks. And finally, this story, this sends a shiver down my spine, I tell you this. Birmingham bin strike activists are now plotting a new pro-Palestine party to break away from Labour. This is, of course, campaigners for Unite, the hard left dangerous union behind this bin crisis, are using the crisis to say, well, we now need to forge a league against the Labour Party by uniting lefty Greens, other trade unionists and free Palestine activists. There's a sick and twisted, dangerous relationship between the hard left and Islamists, isn't there, Kev? This makes me very worried indeed.
I totally agree. And this continuing or increasing syndrome of politicians, political activists, unions who seem to feel that the most important issue in Britain is Gaza is extremely worrying. Now, in the middle of that hellhole that is Birmingham right now, that massive city that used to be a city is now a rubbish tip full of rats the size of cats. There's the MP for Birmingham Molesey. His name is Tahir Ali. And what has been his utterance as his city goes to rack and ruin? What has he stood up and said in the Houses of Commons? Anything about Birmingham? Anything about the terrible state that his city is in? No. He stood up and said it is time for the British government to fund a new airport in Kashmir so that my Pakistani constituents can fly there and it's not too far for them to drive home to their families. I mean, that has been his statement on Birmingham. And there are now 7 MPs. I think I'm right in saying they're the 5th biggest group in Parliament, in the House of Commons, of MPs who are all entirely devoted to Gaza.
Yeah.
Now that is something that we should be very, very concerned about.
Oh, it's chilling. It's chilling. I think people can see wickedness when they encounter it, and I worry very much about the march of the hard left and their Islamist friends. Kevin O'Sullivan, fantastic, the best presenter on Talk. After me, of course. Right, I'm only joking. Right, I'm not joking about Kev. Kev really is one of the best presenters. Everyone loves him to bits. Right, after the break, we're going to be talking about the latest when it comes to Ukraine. We're hearing that America's suggesting that there's only days in which there can be a peace deal. What does that mean? Does that mean America's going to withdraw intelligence sharing, weapons from Ukraine and just let Russia get on with it? Does that mean the Kremlin's going to face the full wrath of Trump? And also, meanwhile, as we speak, you've got Giorgia Meloni over in America, forging a relationship with Trump, much to the disappointment of the EU, who like to control everything. We're going to be catching up with military and defence analyst Colonel Simon Diggins after this.
this very nice woman doesn't want to have her name revealed because she's got a sort of senior post in Glasgow, goes cross-country skiing, flies from Edinburgh to Oslo, got a perfectly valid passport, but gets to Oslo airport and the Norwegian police do not understand the passport rules. They frisk her, they fingerprint her, they detain her, and then they deport her. And finally, yesterday, they got round to saying, not sorry, but a procedural error was made.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, welcome back. We're about to delve into the world of geopolitics because just a few moments ago, Marco Rubio in Paris has said that the US will walk away from its efforts to broker peace between Russia and Ukraine unless there are clear signs of progress in the coming days. Let's have a look.
I think it's important to remind everybody that the Ukraine war is a terrible thing, but it's not our war. We didn't start it. The United States has been helping Ukraine over the last 3 years, and we want it to end. And so we've talked about outlines of both sides. I thought we had positive meetings yesterday. Obviously, the Ukrainians have to go back home. They have to run it by their president. They have to take into account, their views on all of this, and we hope to hear back from them very soon. So if they're serious about peace, either side or both, we want to help. If it's not going to happen, then we're just going to move on.
OK, well, let's try and unpack what that means with Colonel Simon Diggins. Simon, great to have you back on the programme. Now, a lot of people are saying, well, what does this mean, walk away? Does that mean just throw the towel in and let Putin get on with getting on and get what he wants? Because even with Europe having been given a wake-up call, I think everyone sort of recognises that the combined efforts of Europe won't be enough to stand up to Russia. Does this mean, actually, that there's not going to be any further negotiations about peace and the Kremlin will be punished? I mean, which direction of travel do you see this going down?
It's very hard to tell at the moment. I think the difficulty for the Trump administration is they promised a kind of instant solution. They had a view of this war which did not identify properly that the aggressor was Putin. And as a result of that, I think they've been led down a very dangerous and rather negative path. It's not really up to the Americans to say to the Ukrainians, you're to give up your territory, you're not to have a self-defense, oh, by the way, you can get rid of your democratically elected government. But that's a situation they put themselves in. They have absolutely no leverage over Putin. That was given away by Trump at the beginning of the negotiations. He threatened at one stage in the last week or so to talk about putting tariffs on oil-consuming nations who've been taking the sort of shadow fleet oil from the Russians. But there's been no sign of that whatsoever. So he's impatient. He's a man who likes to make a deal, makes a deal quickly from there. But you ask a really good point about what that could mean. Is this sort of active neutrality, where they are genuinely neutral between the two, or will the Trump administration continue to provide the Ukrainians with, for example, with intelligence, even if they start to slow down or even cut off the military supplies? So there's still a lot to play for from here. I don't think it's helpful, this kind of I don't know, New York property dealers brinkmanship. This is a very complex war, killing a lot of people. And we need some patience and we need some intelligence. I don't think we're seeing either at the moment.
I mean, one assumes, if I sort of sit here logically and try and think how this might move forward, if America walks away and just lets it carry on and says to Europe, you do what you need to do, and Putin is revived and seems to think this is great, I'm going to go for more, surely that's going to put egg on the face of Donald Trump. He'll be seen as weak. He'll be seen as actually defeated by Putin. So one hopes, actually, that when he says, well, if there's no peace deal, we're going to walk away, what America might be doing behind the scenes is figuring out how they can then actually get involved more and help Ukraine. I mean, at least that's what I think we need to hope for.
It would be lovely if they do all that, but you saw the body language when Steve Witkoff, who's the special representative of President Trump, went to go and see Putin. first thing he do is put his hand on his heart, as though he was greeting some long-lost kind of, great leader, and lots of photographs, lots of shaking of hands, lots of publicity, basically for Putin. I think the difficulty we've had is that Trump sees himself as a kind of a mega world leader who can bestride the world. And on the other side of this world, there's the leader of Russia, and they all settle the affairs of these minions beneath them from that. And that just simply isn't going to happen. The world is a very complex place, and it's a complex, multipolar world. You have to recognise other people have a view, other people have a perspective. But you're absolutely right. This is now more about saving Trump's face. It is actually about solving the peace or ceasefire issue in Ukraine.
Well, one hopes actually when the ego comes to land that the ego realises that it doesn't want to be bested by Putin. Now, talking about this sort of multipolar world and the people sort of in the anti-Western axis, one thing that America is seeming to take seriously is China. Of course, Russia's best buddies. They need to wake up to that pretty soon. But here in the United Kingdom, we're being warned that electric cars made in China could pose a threat to national security as they're vulnerable to Chinese spying. This isn't the first time we've heard this. Could Beijing remotely control your electric car? And it sort of seems, oh, well, that's a bit far-fetched. But what we do know is that China is a state that wants to get ahead unfairly. It wants to get ahead, whether it's through dumping things on the cheap. It wants to get ahead through nicking ideas and reproducing them to undercut markets. That actually its tactics are very often covert. And yet, despite this as being the official defence assessment by the government spy lab, we seem to have a government that is tripping over itself to cosy up to Beijing.
Yeah, what they're doing, they're basically prepared to compromise on our national security in exchange for another 1% on the GDP growth rate. I mean, GDP growth rate in this country is frankly, glacial in terms of its progress, and they see a way of improving that is by having an open arrangement with the Chinese. We've been very wary of this for a long time. You'll recall that the Americans called time during the Biden administration on the attempt to have Huawei putting its materials into our 5G network for all the very reasons we've got here, and this could also happen with as you saw it within cars. Now that might seem like a remote and an unlikely sort of way of doing business, but we saw the way the Israelis use electronics to wipe out the Hezbollah leadership. It's there. It's a possibility. Cyber attacks, information operations, denial of service through electronic means are all there, and we genuinely have to be aware of it. It may not be something that the Chinese government wants to do immediately, but if you can put forward 2-3 years' time a scenario where perhaps they're putting pressure on Taiwan, even potentially invading it in 2027 onwards, then what a good way to actually completely throw the West upside down and basically turn their cars off. And that's the kind of thing that we need to be wary of for the future. So yes, they're not just a competitor. They're a strategic competitor who are prepared to use force, threat of force, cyber information, disinformation in order to get their own way. So we should be extremely wary of dealing with them in such issues.
Colonel Simon Diggins, thank you for joining me. We're going to take a short break now. I'm delighted to say that as soon as we're back after the break, we're going to be speaking to Peter Hitchens, whose column today in the Daily Mail really did touch my heart. That's after this.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello, welcome back. Now, if you've been listening to the whole show, you've heard me talking a lot about the fact it's Good Friday and insisting that we do reflect on what this means today as a country, as a civilization, as people. Because to me, I just think there's something that really upsets me when this most austere and important of days has been rendered into chocolate treats. Reading a brilliant column today by Peter Hitchens in the Mail, I insisted when I came in to my producer Ted that he phone Peter to see if he could come on the programme, and he can, and he's here. Peter, thank you ever so much for joining me.
Oh, well, thank you for asking. I'm glad you care.
I really do care, and I just want to, you know these words, you wrote them, but read them out again, because I just think they have such resonance in today's society. Talking about Good Friday, there is no fun here, just the dirty betrayal of a good man by those he thought were his friends. A screeching mob full of planted influencers egging it on. A cowardly politician giving in to them. A show trial with false witnesses. A wrongful execution of extreme cruelty. Peter, I have no doubt when you wrote those words, you wrote them to make sure that when people read those, they actually see the echoes in today's society. Talk to me about why Good Friday is so important.
Precisely because it does, in fact, plumb the absolute depths of human despair and evil, and confronts them with a God who is himself prepared to undergo immense suffering, to lose all his power and status in front of a mob, to be falsely condemned, and to be tortured to death. This is the most extraordinary proposition, and I have to say very difficult for most people to take in. But it explains why Christianity has been so very powerful for the past 2,000 years, that it actually engages with one of the most common and persistent human experiences, that is, of suffering and defeat, which most of us will experience at some point or other, and also engages directly with death, the thing we're all profoundly afraid of and don't really understand. But it's a bitter thing, and I much myself prefer the bitter and sad part of it, because of the enormous power it has to make you think about what sort of world you live in, and to remind you that the evil which was abroad in the first century Holy Land is very, very similar to the evil which is abroad in today's world.
Do you think that the sort of deconstruction, the dilution of Christianity has actually opened the door in our society to so many of the wrongs? I always say that we've got a mental health crisis, and perhaps the greatest self-help book ever written was the Bible. And yet so many people throw scorn on Christians, not just as if it's untrendy, but as if we're somehow mad, that science is all settled and anyone who believes in religion is hocus pocus. And yet they will sort of throw out the red carpets for other religions. We must celebrate them, we must endorse them, aren't they wonderful and enriching? And yet, I mean, for example, my other half's got a friend who, when my other half told them that I went to church, they sort of went, oh my goodness, that's shocking, is she crazy? This is a problem, especially when Christians are the most persecuted people on earth. Do you think the destruction of Christianity is a big problem?
I don't know whether Christians are the most persecuted people on earth, and they're certainly not persecuted in this country. No. But they are treated with a fair amount of disdain and mockery. But then again, at the core of the Easter story is the mockery and belittling of Christ himself, who undergoes this experience. And remember, what we believe is that this is God himself undergoing the worst experiences possible in the world which he's created, and therefore understanding them. It's not many faiths have a founder who can be said to have undergone. Most people admire strength and they admire power, and when they see the Christian God humiliating himself, allowing himself to be thrashed, allowing himself to be paraded around the streets in false royal robes, to have people spit in his face and pull out his hair and kick him as he walks to the cross. This was God. This is what we think. And it's the thing is that I don't think that the modern church which is afraid of a lot of what it professes to believe, makes this point enough. It's too soppy. It's too anxious to offer forgiveness to people who haven't said sorry. It's too anxious to include people by singing happy, happy songs and clapping away at them. I think if it were, as it is on Maundy Thursday and Good Friday, an extremely grim experience to go to church, if people saw what was truly involved and the level of penitence and regret required of you if you want to take it seriously, I think you might find that Christianity was mocked less and followed more. The problem has been that for far too long the leaders of the churches have actually kept rather quiet about what the religion is really about. They're afraid of shocking people, but by not shocking people, they've also made people think that they're dealing with a weak and silly and contemptible thing. I would say let's go back to the dark side. Tell them what it really is about.
Yeah, I agree with you. And do you think there's been, well, I'm sure you do, a sort of abject failure of political leaders and public institutions in actually defending Christianity and saying we are a Christian country and this stuff is very important to our society? I mean, even the King's Easter message made reference to Islam.
Well, there you are. I mean, myself, I have Muslim people I believe to be friends of mine who are Muslims, and I share many important things with them and disagree with them about other things profoundly. But I have found that they have often said to me that they would prefer this to be a more Christian country, not a less Christian country. They dislike the secularism here, and they pray. And they believe in God, and I think it's not unreasonable for the king of this country, which contains quite a large number of Muslims, to be friendly towards them. And I won't attack that. But what bothers me much more is that the indifference, which you see very much on display on Good Friday, which used to be a day when the solemnity of the occasion very much overshadowed the whole day, and you could feel it in the country very strongly. It was gloomier than a Sunday. And it's now just another shopping day.
Yeah. It's a day for chocolate, and that's about it.
Sure, yeah. But why is that? Why would anyone put any expectation in politicians for it to be otherwise? The lesson of Pontius Pilate in these events is that this is the politician at the centre of them. He took the easy course, as they always do. He let the mob triumph because it was simpler for him to let the mob triumph. It was simpler for him to make compromises with those who wanted to kill Christ, because otherwise he might have been in political difficulties with them, which would have got him into trouble with Imperial Rome. He was a politician. That's what they like. That's what they do. He knew what he was doing, though. So part of the lesson, if people only knew this story properly told in the magnificent English in which it was originally set out, and you can still hear this sometimes, but not often. If people only knew this, just listened to it or read it, then they'd see that all the things they think they've newly discovered about the wickedness of human society have been well known for at least 2,000 years and were depicted here. That's why I use terms like show trial and influencers in the article today, because these are people. You go to big party political conferences, there are people planted in the audience to make sure the leader gets properly applauded. And I would imagine the same people could be used if you wanted to make sure that an inconvenient resolution, which was before the conference, could be overturned, because people would start shouting against it, and who could tell where that shouting originated? This is not new. None of this is new. This fixing of mobs, the holding of show trials, the obtaining of false witnesses, the incorrect verdicts which increasingly plague our country, I have to say, are not new. This has been done before. And here at this stage in the whole cycle of Easter, we're pretty much prostrate with despair, because at this point in the story, everything has gone wrong.
Yeah.
Every single good force has been defeated and flattened, and there is no hope. And the point about it is that if you believe what we are told then happened, then there is hope. Otherwise, there isn't any. Otherwise, we are just living in a world of spite and revenge and injustice.
Peter, thank you ever so much. Brilliant, brilliant article. Thank you for coming on and talking about the importance of Good Friday on Good Friday. I wish it happened more. And you know what? I would say this to anybody listening here, right, who's not a Christian, but at least sees value in Christianity. So many people just say, well, you know, I'm glad other people are Christians. I'd like to see more people going to church. I think it'd make society better. But not me. No, that's not me, because I just can't believe it's mumbo jumbo, isn't it? It's madness. And all these people who profess to not believe and say it's not for them, how many of them have opened that book? How many of them have actually read the stories and suddenly gone, oh my Lord, this echoes with me in a way I didn't expect it to. How many of people who say, no, I don't want to do the God thing, have actually tried? Or just reject it firsthand because that's just easier, it's lazy, and then hope that the rest of us do our bit in following Christianity to make sure it doesn't die away, to make sure that we can still admire our beautiful churches and we don't all have to wear hijabs and kneel to Mecca. How many people expect everyone else to do that heavy lifting? Because it's not heavy lifting. It's not really an onus to open a book and have a read, and you may find that there are things in there that surprise you. OK, we're going to take a short break now. When I come back, we're going to be talking to Laurie Laird, a US political commentator, on everything happening stateside.
It's in their blood, in their political ideology, to agree with the unions.
Not only that.
Look, I don't know what Mr. Lowe is up to. What I do know is there is a police investigation. I do know that there is an investigation by the parliamentary authorities. Those will sort of carry on follow their course. But bluntly, we're just moving on. We are obviously we're working hard, campaigning around the country, and May the 1st is a very important day for all political parties, including Reform UK.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello, welcome back. Well, as per usual, it's all go in America every single day. There's a new news headline coming out of the Trump administration today. Perhaps it is that Giorgia Meloni's been over in the United States, much to the anger, no doubt, of Brussels, who warned her, do not undermine our position by doing your own thing. Well, guess what? Giorgia Meloni doesn't give a hoot what Brussels has to say. Let's play a clip of her in the Oval Office.
When I
speak about West, mainly I don't speak about a geographical space. I speak about a civilization. And I want to make that civilization stronger. So I think even if we have some problems, okay, between the two shores of the Atlantic, it is the time that we try to sit down and find solutions. So I want to thank President Trump for having accepted an invitation to pay an official visit to Rome in the near future, and consider the possibility in that occasion to meet also with Europe. The goal for me is to make the West great again. Okay? And I think we can do it together.
We can.
I think they're probably rather fond of her over in the White House. Let's speak now to Larry Laird, who is a US political commentator. Great to have you on the show.
Hello, Alex.
How is Georgia going down over there?
Well, I think that she chose her talking points very, very carefully. You know, talked about making Europe great again, talked about wanting to work with Donald Trump, and she very deftly pivoted from trade to immigration whenever she got the chance. She knew that immigration was a much easier topic, much more commonality between Italy and the U.S. on immigration. She sort of, I think, tiptoed away from trade in some sort of quiet deference to the fact that she doesn't really have a whole lot of sway when it comes to negotiating trade with the U.S. or anyone else.
Right, exactly. The fact of the matter is any EU member state doesn't get to negotiate and have its own trade deal with America. That is dominated by Brussels as part of being in the customs union. And so the whole of the EU has been impacted by 25% tariffs, the UK 10% tariffs, because they're just the baseline tariffs, because we're not in the EU, and perhaps we can negotiate a trade deal. But I would imagine that actually part of any sort of trade deal between the US and the UK will be saying to Sir Keir Starmer, look, you're big, you're grown up, you're an island nation, stand up for yourself, do your own trade deal now you can, stop cozying up to Brussels with their net zero madness, with their open borders project, with their anti-Atlanticism, because quite frankly the EU seems to hate America, and also make sure you protect free speech. I mean, there's a lot on the table, and I have a feeling that Donald Trump's going to try and use that to help us make Britain great again. What do you reckon?
I'm slightly baffled, Alex, I have to admit, on the excitement that comes every time somebody in the U.S., J.D. Vance did it earlier this week, the vice president, sort of dangles the potential of a free trade agreement in front of the U.K. First of all, free trade agreement, let's drop the word free. Very unlikely to happen. The next thing is let's talk to Justin Trudeau, the ex-Prime Minister of Canada, about what it's like to be in a free trade deal with the U.S. It may not be that Donald Trump and his administration honor that. I do think that the UK has a better shot of getting something signed than Europe. And I think, I see your point when I do very much think the US loves, Donald Trump in particular, that the plucky little Brits came out of the European Union. You know, this is an administration that does not like multilateralism. And so the fact that the UK has chosen its own path, I think, does give the UK some big brownie points. But let's go back to a trade agreement. That means each side, in theory, gives something up. And I suspect that the things that the U.S. would like the UK to give up may not be all that palatable to UK voters. Things like different agricultural standards, things like a place for U.S. private healthcare in the NHS. Whether these are things that make sense or not, I won't opine on, but I think voters have made it very clear that they're pretty dubious about those things. So we have to think about what the UK would have to give up to get some kind of free trade deal. We're pretty sure that the UK would have to give up the digital services tax. And that's a tax on revenues of big tech companies, brings in just under £1 billion a year here. It's not a ton of money, but at a time when the UK is sort of fiscally challenged, it's money that has been quite helpful. So I think as a country, we need to look at what we are prepared to give up, what we want to preserve sort of the quality of life that we have here in the UK.
I do wonder, actually, like you said, all trade is a negotiation. I actually think there's a lot of opportunities to be grabbed with America as our biggest trading partner. And I'm talking about grabbing an opportunity the last time that Sir Keir Starmer and Donald Trump met. I mean, was there ever more a sort of saccharine, sycophantic image than when Starmer leant across and kept stroking him and pulled the invitation out? Oh, it did work. But let's have a little clip of...
Worked.
Let's have a little look at Donald Trump now, because he's due to come and visit us in September.
I was invited by the king and by the country, great country, they're going to do a second, as you know, a second fest. And that's what it is. It's a fest, and it's beautiful. And it's the first time it's ever happened to one person. And the reason is that we have two separate terms. And it's an honor to be, I'm a friend of Charles. I have great respect for King Charles and the family, William. We have it's really just a great respect for the family, and it's a very great honor that, and I think they're setting a date for September.
It's going to be a smaller visit initially, and then a bigger state visit to follow after. Is that the plan?
Yeah, they say that it's going to be. I don't know how it can be bigger than the last one. The last one was, as you know, was incredible, but they say it's going to be even more important. So it's a great honor to be so chosen.
I mean, yeah, if there's one way to get to Donald Trump's heart, it's pomp and circumstance, isn't it?
But I think, Alex, one thing to look at, we know that Donald Trump has a, let's say, a history of, he's whimsical. He can be a little bit capricious with changing his mind. We look at today's events on Ukraine. We look at Marco Rubio, the U.S. Secretary of State, saying, you know what, we're almost done with trying to get some kind of peace deal, some kind of ceasefire between Russia and Ukraine. Now, and he signaled America's frustration. Now, to take that a step further, does that mean if the two sides can't come to a deal that's acceptable to Marco Rubio and Donald Trump, will the U.S. again threaten to take its military toys away? Take it a little bit further. If Keir Starmer is seen in the vanguard of putting together a coalition of the willing to help Ukraine, could Donald Trump extract revenge? And I think this is something that the UK has to be aware of. Donald Trump doesn't look at trade just as trade. I mean, look at the initial reason for trade sanctions on Canada and Mexico was fentanyl crossing the border, was immigration. So Donald Trump conflates economics and political goals, and I think this is something the UK is going to have to be aware of as it seeks some kind of trade deal.
I think you're right, and well, I hope it all turns out for the positive, because I'm an optimist, but I wait with bated breath. Laurie Laird, US political commentator, thank you ever so much. And it's Dr. David
Hello,
Ball.
lovely. Happy Easter.
Hello. Happy Easter.
I'm saying
glad
happy Easter, of course, the celebration that we should all follow in this predominantly Christian country.
I was going to ask you about just that, because I've been banging on about my Lord Jesus Christ for the last 3 hours, and I'm not ashamed to do so.
No, quite right. Absolutely right. And that's why I'm proudly saying happy Easter, actually. It's great to see people are celebrating, actually.
Are you a believer? Are you churchy at all?
I am, actually. Yeah. I was a choir boy. I was an acolyte. That means I carried the cross and the candles as well in church as well. So it was very much part of my growing up and forms part of my belief structure. So
it's amazing, isn't it, that all the non-believers are on holiday and the two of us are in here
well, isn't that
Friday.
Interesting? Yeah. And I feel bad about that, actually, because I do think it's important that we pause and reflect and think. And it goes back to the King's message, because I just thought, hang on a minute, you're head of the Church of England. And I think in terms of the way that you phrase that, I get it, that you want to be head of or multi-faith.
Yeah, but you wouldn't say Happy Ramadan.
No, you wouldn't.
Meanwhile, let's talk about Christians and Jews and Buddhists and Hindus.
Yeah, I mean, he talks about Judeo-Christian beliefs, so I kind of can forgive that. But at the same time, I think he needs to remember he is head of the Church of England.
I tell you what, there was a clip of me talking about Good Friday and the Judeo-Christian values of this country that the sort of urchins at Talk have put up online. I looked at it, I was going to pin it to my profile. I call them my urchins. And the comments underneath, blimmin' heck, I've upset the Hamas bots. Woo! When you see things like that, it is actually quite chilling when you see all these people poised waiting to attack.
But I think we also need to wake up and look at what's happening politically, because, of course, we've got these pro-Palestine parties that are going to be launched. You're going to start seeing them campaigning when it comes to the general election, and then it will wake people up and make them realise what is actually going on in this country.
Yeah, and quite what is at stake. I think there's been a huge echo